Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
Our dogs honestly saved our lives this night and deserve some recognition. So this whole thing happened when I was maybe 12. I am nearly 17 now. Lee and my sister, who was 14 or 15 at the time, were staying home alone while our parents were at my little brother's hockey game. We lived in a fairly safe neighborhood. Hardly anything ever happened, everybody knew everybody, and almost everyone got along well and liked each other. So we felt safe as we didn't have a reason not to. Our front door was locked. Our back door was locked, but our side door didn't lock. It was broken, but no one ever used it anyway, so my dad hadn't gotten around to fixing it. Lee and my sister were in the living room watching television and doing homework when we heard the fence outside of our house making some noise. It sounded like someone had jumped over the fence. So my sister looked through the blinds and sure enough someone had jumped the fence. Two people actually. They were dressed in mostly black with like a hospital mask over their faces. We freaked out and hid in between the couches in the living room. When we heard the front door knob wiggle, of course it was locked so it didn't open, but we knew whoever it was would go to the side door next, and that one would open. In that moment I was the most terrified I had ever been. But once the door handle started jiggling loud enough, my dogs had woken up. At the time I had a Tosa and a Rottweiler. Once one started barking, so did the other one, and eventually it was just pure chaos. That's when we heard them scream they got dogs, then we heard the fence make the same noise, as if someone jumped over it again. Later that night, a local gas station near my house got robbed by two armed men, and the news reports showed the same people we had seen, same outfits and everything, except this time we got to see their faces. Our dogs truly may have saved our lives that night. The funny thing is, our dogs are the biggest lovers. They may be loud and bark, but they wouldn't bite or attack anybody. This is the one time I'm very glad that these dogs breeds are associated with being quote scary and aggressive, because clearly they scared off whoever wanted to break in that night. So me, a 28-year-old woman, and my husband recently relocated to a small town for work. The area is known to have high criminal activity and a lot of homeless people, but I am not usually scared or paranoid. I decided to go thrifting, hoping to find a baby safety gate. Once I got to the store and parked, there was no one in the parking lot. I went in. Right behind me entered a large, well-dressed male that was persistently eyeing me head to heels. At first I didn't think much of it and I just went on checking the book section they had. After a while I started to feel as if someone is hovering around me. I started to feel a bit anxious because every time I would look behind me, the guy would be standing way too close to me, literally not looking at any books, just pacing around, and would look to the ground to avoid my stance. I am not a shy girl. I know how to stand up for myself when needed, and I know better than to make a predator feel like he is intimidating me. I turned around and gave him a screw-off look and went to the other side of the store to shop, and right behind me followed the creepy guy. I tried not to mind him and continued looking through clothes, vases, and decorations, and wherever I would go he would follow in a very creepy way, keeping himself as close as he could be to me. 40 minutes in, the employees noticed that the guy wasn't interested in anything, and they asked him if he was okay and if he needed anything specific. He said no and brushed them off with a story. He was persistently following me and he tried to corner me in an unseen part of the store. I looked him in the eye with a "don't mess with me" look until he broke eye contact, and I turned away and paced as fast as I could. Of course he was right behind me, pacing as fast as I was. I messaged my husband my location and sent him the description of the guy and told him what was happening. He told me to get out of there safely as fast as I could and call the police if needed. I then asked the employees if they had any gates around. He answered me from behind before they even had the chance to open their mouths. Then the employee took me to show me what they had available. Of course he followed us. I then went to pay for my stuff and asked the guy working there to walk me to my car because I was just not feeling safe and I was sure that the creepy guy would try to hurt me or try to steal from me. My first thought was he saw me park outside and ran after me, hoping to jump me and steal from me. I drive a fancy 2023 model truck. My husband believes that he just wanted to hit on me but didn't know how. I've lived in 3 different continents and had my share of deprived creeps and psychopaths, but I am not sure what to think of this. Not sure if I overreacted. My husband thinks I did, but I still cannot understand what his intentions were, hoping to get closure from this. I go a log box here my home most nights. I live in a safe suburban neighborhood. It's a huge grid of residential streets, in the middle of which is a big open park type area, larger than 2 football fields, that's next to a school. Last night, around midnight, I was walking on the sidewalk next to the park, listening to a podcast, slowly making my way to the school. The school has a big, well-lit parking lot in front, with 2 entrances/exits about 25 yards apart. As I neared the school, I noticed a car in the parking lot with its headlights pointed toward the street. This is unusual for this time of night, especially on a weekday. Maybe it's a cop, I thought. I got closer and saw that it was a beat-up red truck. It had started slowly and aimlessly driving around the lot. As I passed the first entrance, the truck seemed to notice me and stop. I got halfway to the second entrance when the truck rushed toward it. I assumed the driver wanted to pull out before he had to wait for me to cross. No, the truck just sat there. I leaned as I approached. I got to the entrance and saw that the truck was occupied by 4 men. I motioned to the driver to go ahead, but while looking straight forward, he just motioned with his hands for me to cross. At the same time, I noticed a guy in the backseat staring at me menacingly. I crossed in front of the truck, expecting the driver to blow the horn or rev the engine basically to screw with me. He didn't. They just sat there watching me. I continued down the road, and as I was turning right onto another street, the truck exited the lot, turning in the opposite direction. Just a strange encounter, I thought. A few minutes passed, and I saw the same truck approaching me. Getting to me would have required circling the park and traveling down 3 additional streets, and to do it so quickly would have required serious speeding. The truck slowed as it approached, almost stopping as it got to me. The occupants stared daggers at me as they passed. It felt like they wanted to do something but lost their nerve. Now I'm a little freaked out. I'm not a paranoid person, so I started rationalizing their behavior. I told myself they're just cruising around, enjoying some weed before going home for the night. That wouldn't have been out of the ordinary for my friends and me in high school. These guys looked too old for this, though. My gut insisted something was wrong. Out of an abundance of caution, I walked a little down the street and crouched behind a big oak tree surrounded by bushes on some random person's property. I know this is inappropriate and possibly dangerous. I hoped the homeowner wasn't watching me from his Ring doorbell as I lurked on his property. For a couple of minutes, I crouched there before I saw headlights. It was just the neighbor from across the street arriving home. He entered his house, and I breathed a sigh of relief. I told myself I was being ridiculous. I actually felt pretty embarrassed. Just as I was about to stand up, I heard the rattling of an engine and saw headlights slowly moving down the street. It's the red truck. I'm sure I imagined it, but I thought I heard its brakes squeal right before my hiding spot. I wondered why this truck was apparently speeding to get to me and slowing when it arrived. It didn't seem like chance, and I'm now convinced this truck is seeking me out. I started running as soon as the brake lights disappeared. I'm a little more than half a mile from home, and I'm not taking any chances. As I turned onto the street that intersects with mine, I saw headlights and heard a familiar engine rattle. I can't say with certainty that it was the red truck, but I immediately turned around and ran to the side of another random house. Making things more ominous was the spooky music and witch's cackle coming from the Halloween decorations next door. I waited another minute, making sure the red truck didn't pass, and ran the rest of the way home. I walked in out of breath, and my wife asked me what happened. She scolded me for walking so late at night after I told her the story. The middle-aged woman is strong with her, so she immediately pulled up the Nextdoor app. Apparently, there have been several reports of car break-ins in our area attributed to men in a red truck. It's probably not connected, and I was almost certainly being dramatic. I doubt anything would have happened if I'd encountered the red truck again. Still, I'm glad I did it. Please bear with me as this story is quite lengthy, but I hope you find it worth the read. I'd also like to emphasize that I've purposefully left out identifying details to protect the privacy and respect the memory of the victims involved. If you happen to know the real-life events behind this story, I ask for your discretion and understanding, as the purpose of sharing it is for my own catharsis and reflection. Thank you for your consideration and respect for the victims. In the heart of that Southern University town, where the campus and the local community intertwined, I embarked on a fateful night that would haunt my memory for years to come. I was just 20, a junior in college, eager to savor the newfound thrill of going out to bars with friends who, like me, possess fake identifications. The atmosphere was charged with youthful energy, and I reveled in the attention from guys who were more than willing to buy me drinks. It was my first taste of such attention, and I played it up, basking in the newfound allure of adulthood. As I headed to the bar to procure another round of drinks for my friends, I encountered Jay, a man who would cast a sinister shadow over that night. He was a townie, one of those locals we often referred to with a mix of condescension and pity. In this college-centric universe, many townies were drawn to the bars, their troubled lives intersecting with the students' carefree world. Jay didn't seem particularly ominous at first. He struck up a conversation with me, bought me a drink, and we engaged in a seemingly pleasant exchange. But as the night wore on, he grew increasingly agitated when I declined to give him my number. His mood shifted, and he began making a scene, prompting my friends to intervene and extricate me from his presence. Yet, even as we distanced ourselves from him, I couldn't shake the eerie feeling that his predatory gaze never wavered. It wasn't the gaze of someone interested in romance, it was a chilling, haunting stare. Desperate to escape his unsettling presence, I decided to join the guy I was seeing at the time, who was at a bar just across from ours. These bars were mere feet apart in a pedestrian mall, so I thought nothing of going there alone. My car was parked conveniently nearby, and I took refuge inside to charge my phone for a few minutes before heading to meet my friends. But as I sat there, I heard the car door open. It was Jay. This stranger had followed me from the first bar and now sat in my car as if we were old friends, oblivious to the terror he instilled in me. I was paralyzed with fear, unsure of how to react. He seemed alarmingly normal, completely unaware of the distress he was causing. It was a situation that grew scarier by the second as I realized the gravity of the peril I was in. Thankfully, within what felt like an eternity, but was probably just a couple of minutes, the guy I was seeing flung open the car door and asked if I was okay. Relief washed over me as I explained what had just transpired through tears, my voice trembling with fear. He had arrived at just the right moment, a guardian angel in the darkness. His presence sent Jay packing, like a child who had been caught misbehaving. If it weren't for his intervention, who knows where I would be now, and what sinister plans Jay might have had in mind. A year later, it resurfaced in the most chilling manner possible. A fellow junior, Holly, went missing, sending shockwaves through the campus and making national headlines. Search teams scoured the area, and the nation held its breath as they discovered security footage of her leaving a bar, followed by a man, Jay. The search ultimately ended in tragedy as Holly's lifeless body was found. The police investigation led to the capture of her killer, and it sent shockwaves through the university community. Jay had not only taken Holly's life, but had also been responsible for the deaths of 2 other girls, making him a serial killer. Witness reports, news articles from those who last saw Holly say she was telling Jay, "I will not get in the car with you." Jay is currently serving 4 separate life sentences. I had never shared this haunting experience with anyone beyond my closest friends and husband, fearing judgment and repercussions from my conservative upbringing. But now, returning to that town, the memories resurfaced with a vengeance. Some scars never truly fade, and the night when I narrowly escaped the clutches of a killer named Jay remains etched in my memory as a chilly reminder of the darkness that can lurk in even the most seemingly ordinary places. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This has been ongoing and I can't decide if I'm overreacting or not. I've worked at my job for 6 years, very small manufacturing plant. All that time we've had the same janitor come in the afternoons. When I was first hired, he'd come in my office to clean and I always said hello and thanked him, but he never said a single word back. I heard him speak to my boss as normal as anyone once or twice, but never to me. That got uncomfortable, so I stopped saying anything and I started leaving my office when he'd arrive. Eventually, I didn't need to leave my office because he changed his routine and did mine when I was gone for the day. The past year, whenever I walk past him and get out of view, he lets out this cackle. It's weird, uncomfortable, and puts me on edge. Others have heard him do this and have pointed out he's only doing it when I go by. There are times I've avoided getting something I needed because he's cleaning in the space I need to get it from. Last week I was leaving work and my coworker caught him peeking around the corner of a narrow hallway near the exit, so she stopped and waited for me. As I approached where she was and happened to look down that hallway, he's standing still in the middle of it in the dark, staring in our direction. I told my boss about the hallway and the other laughing incidents. He said he'd run a background check to see about him and to make sure I'm not the last to leave the building anymore, not that I ever was. I told him I didn't feel threatened, but that these instances are odd and only happening to me, so it's not comfortable. Am I overreacting? My gut says something is off. For context, I'm a man in my late 30s and was 18 at the time of this story. 20-something years ago this month I moved to London to attend music college. Most of my other friends were still doing their A-levels, but I sacked those off in favor of an opportunity to study drums and percussion, which I'd already been teaching myself for 10 years at that point in the big city, and to escape my sucky rural hometown. It was the last day of the last term of our year-long course, so everyone ended up at the pub to celebrate. It was a fairly rough pub, but the nearest one to our college, so it was always a weird mix of shifty locals and annoying music students, myself included, and this night was no different. Everyone was doing karaoke, which at the time I was just too awkward to take part in, particularly in front of a pub full of people. I was getting bored and wanted to leave, but was staying with one of my fellow drummer friends who lived a lot closer to the pub than I did. Things were starting to wind down, so I told my friend I'd meet him outside once he'd finished making out with one of the vocal students. I went and stood outside on the street next to the pub by some fencing, behind which were some garages of nearby council flats. I changed chain smoked a few Marlboro Reds knowing my friend was going to take his sweet time. As I was standing there, I saw a shifty looking guy in a hoodie with chin-length dreadlocks approaching from afar. As he passed me, we made brief eye contact, but I thought nothing of it and continued smoking. A few minutes passed and I heard what sounded like some sort of rustling or footsteps behind me. I turned around and saw the same guy on the other side of the fencing. He was walking towards the garages but kept looking up at me. This felt a little strange, but I just assumed he was just a weird guy who lived at one of the flats, so I turned around again and continued smoking. After a few minutes, I was a little curious as it had sounded like the guy's footsteps had stopped quite abruptly shortly after I turned back around, so I looked around again to check if he was still there. To my absolute bewilderment, I saw the guy now sort of crumpled in a pile on the floor with his back against one of the garages, trousers round his ankles, his thing in hand, just going ham on himself whilst giving me the most intense eye contact. I swung back around in shock, completely unable to process what I'd just seen. I was frozen and had no idea what to do. About 20 seconds passed and I heard the zip of his fly, then the sound of footsteps growing louder and I knew he was approaching me. The footsteps stopped. "Excuse me," the guy said in a soft and nervous sounding tone. I turned around. "Yeah, what? You're not gay, are you?" No," the guy, almost blushing, says. "Oh my god, I'm so sorry," and hurriedly walks away. For years I used to retell this anecdote as a funny sort of "oh my god, that's outrageous" story. It didn't really dawn on me for a long time how messed up that event was, I think in part due to when it happened, early 2002, and the fact I'm a man, so most people wouldn't immediately think of me as someone who would get flashed at or harassed or be exposed to. It was only in the last 5 years or so, with the increased awareness of that kind of behavior, I started to reframe it a little. Context: I conduct bystander intervention trainings and have an excellent sense of when I feel uncomfortable versus unsafe. I have trained in conflict escalation techniques. I've also taken a self-defense course and feel comfortable using those skills if necessary. I'm a woman in my mid-20s, but usually people guess my age around 16 to 18. Event: I had already been in Marshalls for a while, and having finished trying on clothes, I decided to check the men's section for my partner before heading out to run my next errand. While looking through the racks, I began to notice that someone was following me through the racks and watching me closely. A young man, probably aged 18 to 21, would walk down the aisle a little ways behind me, then pass by me very closely, much more closely than the aisle width required. After having this happen 2 or 3 times, I made eye contact with him after he made his pass, and he said sorry. I first assumed that he was interested in taking my purse and or taking something out of my purse, so I kept a closer hand on my crossbody bag. After having said sorry, he kept his distance for a few minutes, and I continued browsing. However, he shortly approached me and held out a piece of printer paper with an image of his driver's license, a vertical under 21 license, and asked me, "I just got my license photo taken, do you think it's a good picture?" I said, "Yeah, it's a perfectly good photo," and moved on. At this point, I was getting a little weirded out, but there were plenty of other people in the men's section, so I wasn't particularly concerned yet. Shortly after, as I approached the end of the men's section, he approached again and asked, "Can I give you a hug?" I responded, "No, thank you." He asked, "Why not?" And I responded, "I don't really feel like giving a hug now, thanks." Then he said, "I'm not a danger to you." I responded, "I know, I'm just not interested in giving someone I don't know a hug." He went away to another part of the men's section again after this, and I finished looking through the rack. At this point, I was starting to feel deeply uneasy, but continued to play it cool in order to not escalate the situation. While I was browsing the last rack, he came back again and asked, "Can I follow you around while you shop?" I responded, "No, thank you, I prefer to shop alone." He responded with his usual "why?" and I let him know again that I prefer to shop alone. He left again, and at this point I was so thoroughly freaked out that once I made sure he was walking away from me and not looking at where I was going, I left the store and exited onto the strip. He did not follow me, and I entered the neighboring Ross to wait things out. I immediately texted my partner, who was at a conference hosted at one of the casinos. So my question is, what happened here? My partner and I have a couple of theories, but I'd love to hear if anyone else has experienced something like this or knows of other experiences like this, especially the showing the license thing. We can't really figure out what that was for. Theory 1, bad pickup artist. The game tells men that they should use props to try to pick up women. Was this just a really bad attempt at trying to hit on me? Theory 2, I almost got abducted. Israel Keys attempted to abduct a woman from a Marshalls in the late 90s using a similar technique, staring at her for a long time, then asking her how old she thought he was. Kelsey Smith was abducted and murdered after being followed down the aisles in a Target, then followed out to her car. These instances feel eerily similar to what I experienced experienced, and during the encounter, my unsafe alarm bells were definitely going off. I was ready to fight this man and the marshals if necessary. I don't believe trafficking was at play, since trafficking rarely involves getting snatched off the street by a random person. However, I'm not entirely closed off to that idea either. Please check out Polaris Project for more information about trafficking. I, a 29-year-old woman, have been hiking at a wooded trail near my house for about 3 years now, and it's my favorite trail due to the beautiful waterfalls and meadows, but had several creepy encounters over the years. Luckily, I always hike with my 90-pound Bernese, Baker. He's the sweetest boy, but will protect me. First encounter was 3 years ago in the winter when I was walking up a hill and Baker starts growling unlike I've ever heard. I look around and realize there's a man in the shadow of the woods watching us, and when I notice him, he starts walking slowly towards us with his head covered. I said hello as usual, and he didn't respond. I kept walking and got a feeling that I should turn back. When I did, I realized he had turned around on the trail, middle of the hill, so not a common turnaround point, but once he saw me, he walked into the woods and stared out at the valley hugging a tree, so nothing too crazy, but it just felt off. Around the same time a year later, Baker and I are walking on the same trail, and again, Baker starts growling. Usually he is very excited to meet anyone or anything. I realize there appears to be the same man standing off in the shadows watching us, but I figured maybe Baker just scared him, so he was standing away from us, waiting to cross the bridge. Otherwise he easily could have kept walking along the trail instead of waiting for us. We cross the bridge and keep walking. I again get a feeling that I should turn around. When I do, I realize he is behind us, so I had no reason to be waiting for us to cross the bridge. I sit down with Baker by my side and pull out my phone while making it clear I've seen him, not staring, just glancing in his direction. He stops when I turn around, even though I'm off the trail and not in his way, but continues walking after I pull out my phone. I start walking back and find a large stick he had left that had been sharpened with a knife into a spear. I take the spear and continue walking while looking around me the entire time. I know now I should have reported it at this point, but I just convinced myself I was being paranoid. About a year later in the winter, I'm walking along the same path, maybe stupid, but I took a year off and again just convinced myself I was paranoid. It's snowing with the trails mostly empty, and I suddenly see a bunch of trees with frowning faces made out of snow, despite not seeing anyone on the trail for miles. Baker again starts growling at something in the woods that I can't see, so we turn around. I don't report it because I figured it would never be taken seriously. Then today, a few months later, I'm walking along the trail and find a tree with "I see you" written in chalk. I immediately get a weird feeling and turn back and report it to the park rangers and police. Update: I'm working with park rangers to keep an eye out. After sharing in my hiking groups on Facebook, several women have come forward with similar experiences at the same place. One woman was stalked by a man in a full snowsuit in middle of July on this trail. Another was followed all the way to her car within appearing along the trail watching her from the woods at various points. Update 2: 6 different women have come forward with similar experiences with a similar looking man at the same park. They've all reported it to the rangers. I interviewed with the local news. They reached out to me and it's everywhere. Rangers are not happy with me for sharing with the public, but that's fine with me as everyone has a right to know. Someone whacked off the "I see you" message before the news team could see it. It rained, but not that heavily. 3 separate women messaged me thinking it was the same exact guy. Despite the women not knowing each other, they stated he is unstable and spends most days at this park. His cousin reported him too. I shared his name and photos with the rangers, and apparently the suspect is an old park ranger himself, so we shall see. The suspect apparently loves climbing trees and has a bunch of photos of himself 50 feet in the air, so he's probably up in the trees watching. Update 3: apparently he has a secret spot in these woods where has a chainsaw and gasoline. We reported it to the rangers. Pretty sure having a secret campground in a public park is illegal, with or without a chainsaw, and stalking/intimidation is a form of illegal assault, so there's no reason he can't at least be questioned. My aunt and uncle's house was in a small desert town. They had about 4 acres of land and a good amount of space between neighbors. On the back of their property there was a fenced-in area with a large shed and an old salvaged U-Haul moving truck. I was visiting for a couple weeks one summer. My little cousin and I were about 10 and 12 at the time. One morning, we were roaming the property by ourselves. The adults were all out running errands. We ended up walking between the fence and the old moving truck. We were on the passenger side of the truck, walking from the back towards the front. All of a sudden, my cousin just froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood instantly. He didn't make a noise and just pointed at the side mirror. In the reflection, we could see a man sitting in the driver's seat. His face was caked in dirt and blood. He was moving around quickly, and at one point he ducked out of our view. We instantly turned and sprinted back to the house. We locked all the doors and called the cops and family. We were freaking out, running from room to room, looking out the windows, brandishing baseball bats. The police and family showed up after about 15 to 20 minutes. They searched all over, but never found the man. They found the fence was bent down where he must have climbed over it. There was blood and dirt smeared all over the driver's seat of the truck. He must have been trying to steal it because the ignition wires were pulled out like he was trying to hot wire it. No explanation for the blood. Nothing happened after that. My cousin and I had nightmares for the next few nights. That's about it. When I was a teenager, me and my friends used to quite frequently go to abandoned buildings of different sorts. This hobby kind of got worn out for me personally, but when I was at my first or second year of university, I noticed a weird, not too big, abandoned building very close to my university. My university is located pretty much downtown. The place we are talking about is very crowded and filled with elite property, stores, and historical buildings. So it was weird seeing the building standing weirdly in some sort of a yard between other buildings. So I grabbed my friends, there were 4 of us, and we decided to check it out. We came there late at night so there would not be more eyes than necessary. It also was winter. We grabbed our tools and broke a lock to one of the entrances, but it was a dead-end small room. It was pretty creepy with a wheelchair standing there. We then found another door to the building. It was locked more heavily. We could not break the lock itself, so we somehow managed to make a big hole in the door so everyone could just climb in there. It was very loud obviously, so after we've done it, we decided to wait a bit before going in just in case someone called the cops on us. After an hour spent at the nearby McDonald's, we, proudly with how we handled that super locked door that seemed to have been open for years, decided to go in. The building felt empty and damaged. There was not much stuff there besides concrete walls and a lot of trash which we thought was old. There was no light in there at all. Every window was locked too. It's creepy to think back on this decision, but the first thing that we decided to do is to go to the attic. All of us. It was more of the same. A lot of trash, some graphitis, and generally nothing too interesting. Then we decided to come back to the floor we started from and check it out properly. While we were for some reason, I guess being kind of creeped out from the atmosphere, just standing in the corridor, which allowed to overview 2 big halls. Both of them were filled with trash. One of us decided to go across the hall. We could see in clearly with a flashlight to check out some sort of shack that was located in those piles of trash in the end of the hall. He looked inside and then rushed back to us very concerned. He said that there is a body inside. We all thought it was a dead person because the building was locked. No way someone was living there somehow. We felt like someone died and somehow nobody cared. This discussion could not be continued because we then actually saw someone coming at us, a mere silhouette. We lost our minds from this and we rushed into our door hole, which was not perfect for anyone to climb through it in such a rush. While we were making it out, this person shouted something angry at us with a rather unsettling voice and was mad at us for breaking the door. We were scared because of how unexpected that was. We were 100% sure there could not be anyone at a locked abandoned building that was out of use for years and partially damaged. We never thought to ourselves that maybe it was not the city that locked it, but someone managed to privatize the locks. The guy himself was creepy too, living in this absolutely dark, full of trash abandoned private hospital. Afterwards we tried to find what it was. It was the best guess. So my boyfriend and I went to Dave and Buster's for a date night the other day and everything was going well, until I passed by this woman closely standing next to a couple. At first I thought she was with them cause she was following them around. She looked like she was in her middle to late 20s. I saw her staring at me from afar, which was weird, but I shrugged it off since I'm Southeast Asian hanging out in a majority white and Hispanic populated area. Then my boyfriend and I walked past her and I felt her tap my arm. So I did what any normal person would do when someone taps their arm. I looked. When I turned my head to look at her, she didn't say anything and continued to stare with a blank look in her eyes. I paid it no mind. I have a pretty heavily tattooed arm, so I thought, you know, maybe she doesn't know social cues and just wanted to touch my tattoo. Yeah, that's it right. A few minutes later, we're still looking for another arcade game to play, and once again I see that same woman, but this time she's not with the couple and she's staring again. My boyfriend and I found a game to play, and as I focused on watching him do his turn, I felt a few quick taps on my arm once again. It was the same lady. This time I decided not to look despite how uneasy I felt, but I did see her pass by. My boyfriend finished his turn on the game and we started looking for another. As we walked around, I started analyzing the strange woman. She didn't have an arcade card and was walking around pretending to press buttons on machines ever so often. She did not go there with anyone. The couple she was by earlier was nowhere to be seen. The look in her eyes kind of reminded me of the people on some type of heavy drug in the downtown part of where I live. Had a creepy and stoic look on her face. As we headed to the ticket prize area, I was talking to my boyfriend about something and felt her tapping my arm again. This time I was fed up. I quietly told my boyfriend, who mind you is a pretty big and buff guy with 2 tattoo arm sleeves. My boyfriend asked me to point her out, so I looked around to find her and saw her staring again. I pointed right at her and my boyfriend was about to walk towards her and she hid behind the arcade machine. We left after that cause I felt pretty uncomfortable, especially since I'm already not about strangers touching me with no consent. Now that I've had time to process everything, I realize how creepy or strange that encounter was. I keep getting reminded of the blank look in her eyes and haven't been able to sleep properly cause of it. So I parked in the car park further away than the other cars this time at work. There was a man in a worky vest, a high visual vest with an old rusty pickup stick. I went shopping with my kids, then as I was walking to my car I had this strange feeling like I shouldn't have parked here because there aren't any people around. I get to my car and notice the man is still in the car park and I just thought maybe he's volunteering or something. He was a fair while away from me, definitely not close to me. I put my kids in the car, put my stuff in the boot, strap my son in the car, and then go to my daughter's side and buckle her in. I usually look around as I'm doing these things to make sure no one sneaks up on me, but I did it with my daughter because her seatbelt is harder to strap, so I was concentrating on that. I heard a car drive past and then people walking past talking, and that's when I stopped midway buckling my daughter in to look around, and that man was in front of my car about 2 to 3 meters away walking over and staring at me. I looked at him and then he put the stuff he had in his rusty pickup stick thing over a waist high wall, and he also didn't have a bag with him to collect the stuff, and then he turned around and walked away. I'm wondering if those people didn't walk past, could have I been a victim, or is this reaching? If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. I am not sure why I am writing or posting this, but I feel so shaken by this experience. I thought writing it out might be therapeutic. A few weeks ago, I was watching the news and one of the stories reported that a teacher from a prominent private school had just been convicted on multiple accounts of child assault. The victims including his children as well as students. The report of his arrest and allegations had been suppressed until the trial was over, however was now being made public. The reporter also referenced that the defense lawyers argued for a reduced sentence on the basis that the teacher had also been assaulted by his father when he was a child. When the name and photo of the teacher was shown, I almost choked. It was Cameron, who one of my best friends from primary school. I couldn't believe it. In primary school, I was best friends with 2 other boys, Cameron and Wilson. We finished primary school in 1995, and whilst they were both sent to the same high school, I was sent to a different school and we therefore lost touch after that. We would often sleep over at each other's houses, either the 3 of us or just 2 of us, and I started to recall memories I had completely forgotten, all involving Cameron's father. I really don't remember things clearly, but I remember different incidents at various sleepover nights at Cameron's house. Cameron and I would be changing into our pajamas before bed, and his father would come in and talk to us. I know it sounds warped, but I still remember thinking that he was doing this because he was treating us like grown-ups. I think this might have been because my family were extremely prudish with nudity, and I must have felt that nudity was an adult thing, and he was therefore treating us like grown-ups by having a normal conversation. I know it sounds foolish, but I was around 9 to 10 years old when this happened and totally innocent. Remember, this was the mid-90s, and whilst we knew about stranger danger, we didn't consider friends' parents to be strangers, and no one ever talked about child assault. I also remember times when Cameron and I would be taking a shower, one after the other, and he came into the bathroom to talk to us. I also clearly remember that I saw his father naked once, and he entered the shower as I was leaving it. This is probably the clearest memory because it was the first time I had seen a grown-up without any clothing on, and that his nakedness was fully visible and he was standing close to me. Only now as an adult thinking back to that experience, did I realize he was putting himself quite deliberately on display. I just remember him just standing there openly before he entered the shower. I did have a vague memory that he asked Cameron and I to go downstairs, and that Cameron's mother and sister were entering the door downstairs. But as I said, none of these memories were very clear. I hadn't thought about any of this for years, and it dawned on me how innocent I was, and that I didn't realize that his behavior was totally inappropriate. Now that Cameron's lawyers said he was abused by his father, I started to feel sick and overwhelmed by anxiety as I tried to work out whether those experiences were linked. and if there were any more experiences that I perhaps couldn't recall. I really wanted to reach out to Wilson to see if he would be willing to discuss it. I hadn't spoken to him since we were 12, more than 25 years ago, but I fortunately found his profile on Facebook. I messaged him to let him know who I was and named the school and year we finished. Hey, this is Ryan and we were best friends in primary school. I am not sure if you saw this link, but our other friend Cameron was just convicted of child assault. I know we haven't been in touch since we're kids, but I am hoping you would be open to having a chat with me. I am just remembering some things from my childhood involving Cameron's father. I left my mobile number and waited for his response. Wilson responded that same day, "Oh my god, I saw this story too and I am really glad you reached out. I have been feeling so sick about all of this and this has opened up a lot for me too." Wilson said he would call that night. When he called, we ended up speaking for 2.5 hours. His memory was stronger than mine, but that's probably because the poor guy had more to remember. He said he was abused many times by Cameron's father during those same years. The sequence of events was almost identical to my memories. On the first nights when he slept over, Cameron's father started entering the room when the boys were changing before bed. He then started entering the bathroom whilst he was showering, and he eventually entered the shower, which is when the abuse started. He said that Cameron would often be there when it happened, but had no memory of me being there. This went on for a couple of years and ended in the first year of high school when he turned 13. It was around this age he actually started to become aware that what his father had done was wrong, and only then he felt uncomfortable about it. He stopped talking to Cameron around that time, and they fell out of touch. Wilson never reported it or told anyone, however entered into therapy for some time when he was an adult as he tried to process what he had experienced. I still don't know if I remember that date in the shower accurately, however if Cameron's mom had unexpectedly arrived home. That probably saved me from suffering the same abuse. I had no idea how close I came to experiencing things that could have completely turned my life around. It shocks me to remember my innocent child's mind having no awareness that anything was wrong, and it would have been so easy to have taken advantage of that naivety. I am still wondering if I have suppressed anything more that might have happened, and I haven't been able to stop thinking about it, so I will book into therapy to try and work through it. I have changed names in this story as Wilson still hasn't told anyone, and I don't want anyone reading to piece this together, but the entire experience has shaken me so much. I am glad that there is more awareness about abuse and people are more open with their children, but please educate and protect your kids. I only now know how easy it is for people to take advantage of children. On my 19th birthday in September 2014, I'd moved into my first home, a small one-bed flat. I was beyond excited to have the freedom and independence that living alone would offer me, and quickly set about buying new furniture, decorations, and items for my home. One afternoon on the bus home after a trip into my local town to buy more household items, an elderly gentleman, in his late 60s if I had to guess, started speaking to me. I've always been a social person that'll gladly speak to whoever speaks to me, so I engaged him in the conversation. Just polite chit-chat about what we'd been up to that day, what our plans were for the rest of it. Upon reaching the stop I'd be getting off at, he told me he was also getting off at this stop as he was visiting a friend who lived in a neighboring block of flats. He offered to help me carry my shopping, and I agreed. I walked with him to the front of my block and said my goodbyes. He left towards a different block, and I thought that was that. He didn't enter my building or see which flat belonged to me, or so I thought. A few days later, I heard a knock upon my door. I opened it to find the same elderly gentleman standing outside my door. I was quite taken aback considering he should have known which flat I actually lived in. He'd also managed to get into the building without ringing my doorbell. The realization hit me that he was hidden out of sight to watch which flat I entered. Side note, the block had large windows in the communal area. He quickly forced his way into my home and tried talking to me. I lied and stated I was about to leave as my friends were expecting me, hoping this would encourage him to go. He then started groping me under my clothes and underwear. I moved his hands away, but he kept trying to remove my clothes. I ran to my front door and told him I'm leaving now, you need to go. Luckily he did, but loitered. I waited to make sure he'd walked away before walking in an opposite direction and immediately calling my dad in tears. We rang the police, who were as unhelpful as they could possibly be. 2 female officers who asked me why did he let him into the flat, despite me saying he'd forced his way in. They encouraged me to not press charges as the name and address he'd given me in our first exchange were falsified, telling me it would be difficult to prove, a lot of paperwork, and he'd have to relive it in court if we did manage to find him. I regretfully agreed. I was shocked and scared, and the police already were so unsupportive. It doesn't end there though. This man continued to stalk me for months, regularly appearing at my door, following me when I was out. It wasn't until he was on the same bus as me to town when I went to meet friends that it finally stopped, as this was the first time I was able to point him out to someone. My friends went over and publicly called him out for stalking and harassing me. They threatened him, saying if we ever hear of you doing this again, you'll not be able to use those arms to abuse another person again. Leave our friend alone. And he quickly scampered away, and that's the last I ever saw of him. But this incident shook me. It all happened simply because I was polite to a seemingly innocent elderly man who wanted to help me and make conversation. Needless to say, I've never accepted another offer of helping me carry my shopping. Be careful who you let help you. It might not be good intentions they have in mind. I just got back from a family vacation in Los Cabos, Mexico. We stayed at a nice Western resort, and usually around 9:30 at night, my family would head back to their rooms to go to sleep. Naturally, as a 25-year-old, I wanted to stay up and party or go drinking at bars, but my older brother was working remotely and wouldn't go out with me. After the family went to bed, I went out to a bar around the corner from my hotel and ended up befriending the locals there and a 29-year-old guy from San Diego named Luke, who was there for a wedding. We started hanging out every night after my family went to sleep, and on the third night of the trip, Luke asked if I wanted to meet him in downtown Los Cabos with his friends. I really wanted to, but I was at an important dinner with the family that went on later than usual. I ended up staying home that night. The next night I met him at this huge mansion they rented on Airbnb, and he told me that it was good I couldn't make it out the night before because of how scary of an experience it was. He explained to me that the night before, his buddy was taking a piss outside and someone approached him and held out a key with a bump of coke on it. Without thinking, he snorted the bump, and the person who offered it was now demanding he buy an $80 bag from them. He was drunk and refused, while getting pretty aggressive towards them. Things went from bad to worse as the Mexican who offered the bump started following their group from bar to bar for the next 3 hours, taking pictures of them. He called his friends, and there were now a group of them following behind and claiming to be affiliated with the cartel. They warned that if Luke's buddy didn't pay them, they were going to call their boss. Luke eventually went over and tried to smooth things over. They told him his friend had stolen from them and it was going to cost him his life if someone didn't pay up. The cartel member also pulled his shirt up, revealing a 9mm pistol in his waistband. Luke did the right thing and remained calm while offering to take them to an ATM and pay out of pocket $160 so they could all be left alone. The cartel members gave him an empty coke bag and abruptly left. Even after him doing all this for his friend's safety, his friend denied any responsibility or wrongdoing and even had the audacity to blame Luke for trying to help by getting involved. He also didn't offer Luke a single dollar. After this event happened, Luke got robbed again in the same night, with a girl who ripped his $200 gold necklace right off his neck. His friend was cool to me but sounded like a real jerk after Luke explained this to me. Poor dude was just trying to be a good friend and was met with no gratitude, only to be robbed again. Needless to say, I am very happy I didn't make it out to meet them that night. I also think things could have gotten a lot worse for them had he not offered the cartel members money. Be careful out there and never accept quote-unquote free drugs from a stranger on the street in Mexico, or really anywhere. It always comes with a price. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Back in 2019, an 18-year-old girl, decided to download Tinder a few months after a rough breakup. I was very inexperienced with dating and pretty shy, so it seemed unlikely that I would meet a potential partner in person. Anyway, after a few matches that led to nothing, I came across the profile of someone that I found very attractive. He was 21 years old. We matched, exchanged snapshots, and continued to set up a date. Our first date was relatively normal/enjoyable. We saw a movie, and by the end of it I felt like we hit it off. However, our relationship was extremely short-lived. Not long after I had agreed to be his girlfriend, after about a month of going out, he began to behave very erratically and would sometimes fall completely silent in the middle of conversation, ignoring me when I tried to ask him what was wrong. He became hot-tempered, slamming doors and speeding on the road when he was mad. I started to feel really uncomfortable about our relationship. This went on for about a few weeks until one night, when we were on our way to have dinner downtown, he fell silent mid-conversation. I became extremely anxious as he pulled into a nearby parking garage, wondering what I had done to upset him. As we parked, I decided to ask him what was wrong. He did not answer. When I asked him again, he shouted at me to shut up. I was completely frozen for a moment, but I finally got up the courage to tell him we were done, gather my belongings from the car, and walk over to the nearest coffee shop to call an Uber. It was fairly late at night, so I walked as fast as I could, hoping he wouldn't follow me. When I made it to the shop, I noticed I had several missed calls from him. When I made it home that night, I blocked him on all social media and decided to never contact him again. I'm fairly familiar with the dynamic of toxic relationships, and I knew that if he could talk to me that way, completely unprompted, it was likely that he was capable of much more. About a week goes by as I start to settle my emotions a bit. I decide to confide in a friend who had never met the guy about what happened, feeling completely embarrassed. A few nights later, I received a text from the same friend. It was a screenshot of an Instagram message from someone she didn't follow, my now ex. It said something to the effect of, "Hey, I'm sorry we're happy to meet like this, but my name here is ignoring me and I need to talk to her." My heart sunk. I decided to message all of my friends separately and let them know what happened, just in case. Later that week, I started receiving several messages from various accounts, all without profile pictures or posts. Eventually, I gave in and responded to one, asserting that the relationship was over and that I didn't want to hear from him again. I blocked the accounts immediately afterwards. As time went on without hearing a word in weeks, I figured I had reached the end of the situation. Until one morning while I walked to my car, I noticed something dangling around the handle of my car door. It was a necklace I gave him. He had only picked me up once from my house before. The thought of him driving to my house, about a half hour from his place, earlier that night freaked me out. I was shaken up for a while. It was by no means an expensive necklace, and I had the exact same one, but I kept it pushing. I thought maybe it was his way of acknowledging that we were done. 2 months later, I was working my job at a small boutique near my house. I was used to answering the phone several times a day, so when the phone rang I thought nothing of it, but when I picked up I immediately recognized his voice. He started rambling about wanting a sweatshirt back, but I hung up before he could finish. That was the last time I would ever tell someone I was dating where I worked. I was completely losing it at this point, especially considering he had never called me at work while we were together. I didn't even know how he knew that I was working that day and or time. I told my older sister the situation and she, being very protective, decided to message him herself. She told him to leave me alone and even offered to give him back the sweatshirt for me. He refused and insisted on meeting up with me in person to get it. When it became abundantly clear that he didn't actually want the sweatshirt back, she threatened him with a private protection order, to which he never responded. That was the last time I heard from him. We moved into a suburban house in the southern United States a few years back. When the pandemic hit, I found myself working remotely. It was great since I spent more time with my family and didn't have to spend 2 hours in traffic. However, being home a majority of my week exposed me and my family to a variety of strange encounters that have only escalated through the years. Early in the pandemic, we got a knock on the door in the middle of the morning. I was in a meeting, but I heard my partner open the door. I could tell by the voice it was our next door neighbor, an older woman who lived alone. She was in the process of moving and had stopped by every day or so to give us a few odds and ends that she didn't want to take with her. However, within seconds my partner called my name with a worried tone. I excused myself from the meeting and head over to our landing, which is open to the front door below. Both my partner and the neighbor look slightly panicked. One of our neighbors says there's a strange man sitting on our back wall. What do we do? For context, my house is on a green belt. There's about 500 yards of woods and field until you hit a 4-lane road and small shopping plaza. Our back wall is a smooth concrete and around 6.5 feet high. The ground on the green belt side is sloped, which ends up making the wall about 7 feet high on the green belt side. A taller person with considerable effort could probably scale it. I initially think there's no way someone is up on the wall right now, but sure enough, as I run downstairs and look through the back sliding glass door, there's a middle-aged man smoking a cigarette with both feet hanging into my yard. He's kind of lazily staring at the back of mine and my neighbor's houses. My adrenaline starts to kick in. My kid's swing set and toys are in the backyard. I hate confrontation, but I seem to be automatically moving to open the back door. My partner asks what I'm doing. I open the door and step out onto the porch and start walking across the yard. As I get closer, I can tell the guy is bugging and probably homeless. He notices me when I get about 6 feet from him. I'm trying to stay calm and not escalate. "Hey man, what are you doing up here?" He gestures around him, enjoying the view. I interrupt, "Yeah, you gotta get down and go somewhere else." He just kind of stares at me and swings a leg over the other side but stays put. "Please get off my property," I say more forcefully this time, trying to hide any wavering in my voice. Yeah, okay, he slides the other leg around and jumps down, disappearing from view. Never saw this person again. Thankfully, a few months later, I'm working from home. My partner and kid are gone, so I'm alone. There's a knock at the door. Usually, I ignore them unless I'm expecting someone. Most of the time, it's either Amazon or a solicitor. They usually knock once and then take off. However, this person leans on the doorbell and knocks again. Annoyed, I leave the office to go see who it is. I make my way to the door and can hear a muffled conversation taking place on the other end. Before I can look through the peephole, I look and see 4 people all dressed like they're heading to a business lunch, 2 men in their middle 20s, an older man, and a young woman towards the back that couldn't have been more than 20 or 21 years old. I slowly open the door out of curiosity, and the older man immediately gets uncomfortably close and starts speaking forcefully in a language I don't understand. It takes my brain a moment to catch up. I can't understand you, I start to say. He pauses and asks in English, you can't speak Russian, though. Then there's a long moment where we all kind of stare at each other. He looks like he doesn't believe me. Flurried, where is the nearest Russian church? He asks, while the others stand silently behind him. I have no clue. I genuinely have no idea if such things exist in the southern United States. He thanks me and then they all walk back to their nondescript sedan and take off. They did not stop at any other houses on the street. I, a 26-year-old woman, live in a flat building in a good area. It's a long, windy cul-de-sac, so there's not many cars coming in and out unless it's people leaving or coming home from work. My boyfriend is away to Thailand for a month and we usually take the dog out together at night. I went myself, which I was fine with. I usually feel safe. Last week, at around 8 at night, I left the flat to take my dog for a pee. My dog is extremely excitable, especially around other people. She just had her space surgery. She has a cone on her head and stitches that have to heal. I'm waiting for my dog to do her business, and a car pulls in and drives slowly past me. The guy did a friendly neighborly nod towards me, so I did a small smile back, you know, to be polite. The guy parks at the front of the building, and I'm at the other side of the car park on the grass with my dog. I'm watching my dog, trying to get her to hurry up because it was freezing. I look up, and the man has stood outside his car staring at me. Freaked out by this, I turn my attention back to my dog. I keep looking over my shoulder, and he's staring with a creepy smile on his face. I looked away again for a second, and he was walking along the road slowly towards us. I'm a really friendly person. I can be paranoid and aware, as any woman should be at night, but something about him made me feel scared. He's walking so slow, as if he wants to talk to me, so I hide behind a van, and I'm telling my dog hurry up and pee. I can't see him anymore, which terrified the life out of me. All I hear are footsteps coming towards us. The guy peeks his face around the van, and my dog goes nuts. She's jumping around, barking aggressively, which she never does with people, and the guy doesn't take that as a reason to leave. My dog is showing that he doesn't want his presence, but even though she's doing this, he continues walking towards us slowly. I start backing up and say to him to please leave as she's just had surgery and she's too excited. In the most quiet, sinister voice he asks what's your name. I couldn't really hear him. He kept repeating the question. I eventually understood what he was asking. My dog is still going absolutely nuts at him. I say again, please, my dog's just had surgery. You need to walk away, she's too excited. Ignored again. Walks towards us, asking my name, so I start walking away from him. He ponders for a minute, still smiling, creepily may I add. He eventually backs up slowly, still facing me. I swear he did this for at least 20 seconds. He walks back to his car, looking over his shoulder at me, then stands back at his car and stares for another 3 minutes. I pretend my dog is doing something, which she's really just being a pain in the butt and just standing there. I look up and he's gone. I'm shaking and sending my sister voice notes about what's going on. She's telling me just go inside, but she doesn't realize I'm frozen in fear. Eventually, I see a woman and her son rock up to the front door, so I half jog over with my dog to go inside the same time as them. The front of our building has glass doors. I glance in and the man is standing there, waiting for us. I told the woman this man has been following me and my dog. I'm scared and she walks in with me. The man sees I'm not alone and walks right past us out of the building again. I run into the lift with my dog, get in and lock my doors. I decide to tell my 2 guy neighbors about it, as my boyfriend is away and they agree to run downstairs if I ever need them. I took a picture of his car and registration plate, as my twin sister gets the train home late at night after work and I want her to be wary of him. Well, today I was out with my dog at 11 in the morning, just doing our usual walk around the block. We walk into the building and as we are heading to the lift, I see the guy peek his head around the corner. He was looking for me. He started walking towards me. At first I didn't recognize him, but then he smiled his creepy smile and I realized who it was. He said hello, so I said hi then beeline for the lift. He came towards me and my dog again. I pressed the lift button just watching it come down from the 6th floor. He comes and stands closer to me again. My dog is going nuts at him. He asked what my name was. He has an accent. He asked again when I didn't understand what he was saying. I asked, what, my dog's name or mine? He goes, yours. I froze and said a fake name. He started to move closer. I had no time to pay attention. The lift was about to open and I could run away. He told me his name. I replied, nice to meet you, and finally the lift doors opened. I walked in and pressed the button to my floor, hoping he'd leave me alone. He ran behind me as I walked in, and when I'd like to see you again, again. Shivers ran down my spine. I was so creeped out. I replied that I had a boyfriend, but thanks. As I said this, the lift doors were closing and he tried to stick his hand out to stop the lift from closing. Thank goodness they closed on time. I'm only on the next floor up, so I was so afraid he was going to run up as he could see what floor I got off at. I stopped for a moment and almost pressed a different floor, but I just wanted to get into my home and lock the doors. The lift opens and he's not there, so I beeline to my front door. There's a glass door to the stairs, and I swear I thought I saw someone coming up. I ran in and locked the front door. I was so confused by what just happened. Next thing I do, message everyone with the update. They told me to phone the non-emergency police number, even just to get it on record, so I did that, and the police arrived at my flat at 3 in the afternoon. I explained everything to them, and they said I could either 1, get the police to go to his front door and tell him to knock it off, or 2, next time he does something like that, tell him to leave me alone, and if he doesn't, phone the police as it would then be considered harassment. But for now, the police couldn't do more, which is fair enough. I didn't want to anger him at this stage, as it's not a crime at this point, but why can't he just leave me alone? I've clearly shown that I'm not interested. I hate saying something's going on when it maybe isn't, but I just have a terrible gut feeling. I hadn't seen the guy since the last incident, however I saw him today. I again was taking my dog out to the toilet around 1 in the afternoon. As soon as I left the main door, I look and the guy is sitting in his car. He clocked me. I started walking past his car when he got out and said hello to me. I completely ignored him and walked on by. I was preparing myself to shout at him if he kept following or talking to me. I went over to the grass and the guy is standing at his car staring. Again, I'm a bit further away, so I text my sister letting her know that he was at his car watching me. She didn't reply, so I phoned one of my guy neighbors and he quickly got his shoes on and said he was coming down the stairs. I look back at the man and it seems as though he has his phone out, recording me. I started shaking, working myself up to the point of confronting him and telling him to leave me alone. Next thing I know, my sister bolts out of the building and fast walks over to me and my dog. She said as soon as she came out of the building, she saw him back inside his car with the car door fully open and his back was turned to her because he was watching me. So she saw at this time, he looked at her briefly and watched her walk over to me. He started staring at us both. That's when my guy neighbor got outside and walked over to us. The man continued watching as I told them both I think he was waiting for me to go back into the building because why was he just sitting there? My sister had enough of it, so she told me and my neighbor to take the dog for her walk and stormed over to the guy's car. She said excuse me and he was shocked. She stood right in front of his car and explained that he needs to leave me alone. I'm not interested. I told him the dog had surgery and he wouldn't leave, which is unacceptable. She also said that I had mentioned about my boyfriend, so he needs to leave me alone. He just nodded and mumbled a few times. She said he looked frightened. She walked back into the building, so we took the dog a walk and when we got back, he was gone. Probably got out of his car and ran back into his flat. I mean, he made me uncomfortable, so she did it to him. Now, if anything else happens, I'm phoning the police as they would then say it's harassment. When I was in my early 20s, me and some friends went out to celebrate my birthday. We went to a couple parties since it was the weekend, then bar hopped the rest of the night. While we were at a bar, we met a group of guys that offered to buy us drinks. It was my birthday, so this sounded nice. We danced around with them for a bit before retreating back to our little section. One of the guys come over to our section and asked me to dance again. I told him maybe in a bit and went back to partying with my girl. We didn't see them again until the club closed. The group of guys came over to us, and of course we're trying to find someone to go home with. The same guy that approached me earlier had approached me again. I laughed it off and thanked him for a good time. By this time, we all were getting in the car. We had a designated driver and they made sure each of us got home safe after the club. 3 nights later, me and my then boyfriend were knocked out as I had work the next morning. My boyfriend worked nights, but he was off this night. This was at 3:41 in the morning. There's a knock at the door. My boyfriend goes to answer it and I'm walking behind him, wondering who could possibly be at the door at that time of night. We lived in a not so good area, so the porch lights would work when they wanted to, and now wasn't one of those times. As my boyfriend opens the door, the person at the door says, "Excuse me, ma'am, I can't get my car to start," and as he looks up, I immediately recognize him from the man at the club. I scream and my boyfriend catches on and closes the door. Lee and him had a few laughs when I told him about the guy at the club, so when I told him that was him, he opened the door back, I guess to confront him, but he was gone. We hadn't seen a car, but again, it was dark. I don't know how this man found where I live, other than following us home that night. I still get the chills thinking what may have happened if my boyfriend wasn't there that night. On Sunday, which was the 27th of November, at 19:45 I left a hotel in Krakow, Poland with my boyfriend to go to Kojo Mojo restaurant via Bolt. However, just prior to this I had a drink at the hotel bar, and within 15 minutes of drinking some of it, I commented how drunk I already felt from it. Upon arriving to Kojo Mojo restaurant in Krakow, we proceeded to have dinner and some wine. This is when I blacked out and the rest of the night is a blur. We apparently left the restaurant shortly after and went to a bar which was a walking distance from the restaurant. Apparently upon arriving I looked like I was super drunk and had no hand or eye coordination, couldn't talk, and also proceeded to fall off the bar stool backwards. At this point my boyfriend tried his best to take me out of the restaurant, and whilst walking to the taxi I fell over again completely into a pile of bikes. I couldn't even stand up by myself. Upon arriving back to our hotel by taxi, he got out first, and before I could get out, the taxi drove off with me still in. At this point I still do not remember anything at all. My boyfriend straight away called the police and tried calling me, and I didn't answer, and he tracked my location to a car rental company. Finally, after about an hour, a woman picked up my phone pretending to be me. This was when my boyfriend called the police again to chase them, who came to the hotel to investigate. I only have 3 glimpses of memories for the window of 5 hours which I was missing for. 1. Being told to hide in the back seat footwell. 2. Being in a house which is still in the middle of construction which did not look like it was in a city, with other young women who had IVs attached. 3. Being on a motorway crying and pleading them that I have to get back to the hotel to get my passport, as I have a flight back to London. I somehow, and don't know how, managed to get back to the hotel after loads of crying and pleading and negotiation. As they dropped me off at my hotel to get my passport, I ran straight to reception and did not go back out again. From this point I slowly started becoming more conscious of my surroundings, but it's still quite foggy. Shortly after returning to my hotel room, the police were informed that I had returned and started their investigation and looking at the camera footage which confirms my story. I then shortly realized that I was wearing a polo from the car rental company, which was located in the same location as my phone for the rest of the night. However, every single time someone would pick up my mobile, it would be a different woman of Albanian descent, and they said that they found my phone on the street, which doesn't make sense. Weirdly enough, my boyfriend got a phone call from a different police station the following morning saying my phone was handed in. I have the taxi driver's photo, registration plate, name, and phone number, which was also passed over to the police in Poland. However, they haven't been able to help in any way. For context, I didn't grow up in a good area. I won't give location for privacy, but I live in a fairly large city. At the time I was around 10 or 11. This was overall not a good area. Lots of gang activity, drug use, that kind of thing. One of those neighborhoods with the jacked up sidewalks and shopping carts strewn everywhere. There was a park a couple blocks away from my house, and I decided to go on a run and spend some time there on my own. I don't know why I was allowed to leave on my own, knowing the area. It was still light out when I jogged down there, but it started getting dark when I actually reached the park. It was around dusk. The layout of the park was a big rectangle basically. It faced out long ways, so the shorter side was where the gate was. It's hard to explain, so I'll try to attach a picture to show you people what it looked like. There was a set of swings at the very front, and I sat down to hang out there for a bit. At the time I didn't have a phone with service, I just had music downloaded to listen to. I was sitting with my earbuds in and just got this really awful feeling. It felt like a tingling on my back, and I knew something was up. I took one earbud out and kept swinging, but I couldn't shake that feeling. Finally, I turned around to check behind me. There was an alleyway leading into the park that curved, so you could only see part of the way down. It was all white gravel. Down the alley was a dumpster. There was a figure on the ground with a ton of red stuff around him, which I now know was blood, and another guy standing walking towards me fast. The alley was across the playground, about 40 feet away maybe. As soon as I saw the man approaching me, I dipped out of there. He had something in his hand that I couldn't see, but he was holding it like a knife or a pair of scissors. I sprinted the couple blocks back to my house and got into the back to make sure no one saw me. I didn't tell my dad until years later, and he fully believed me. That area was bad news, and I'm amazed something bad didn't happen to me with how much I was let out alone. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. So, about 9 years ago, my boyfriend, now husband who is 44 years old, and I, a 40-year-old woman, were driving cross-country from California to Florida. My husband had an enormous Rottweiler named Kuma. It means bear in Japanese, and it fit. He was 110 pounds. I had only just met Kuma maybe 2 days prior, since my hubby and I were in a long-distance relationship at the time. So Kuma and I, didn't know each other well yet, but he was a great boy and talked a lot. We called them Umbo Crumbles. We stopped at a gas station so that we could all get get out, stretch, and use the restrooms. He got Kuma on his leash and said he'd take him for a walk. I offered to do it instead since I didn't need to use the restroom urgently. Now, I'm not a small girl, I'm 5'10", but I am 125 pounds. My husband is almost 6'5" and built like a Viking, so a dog Kuma's size wouldn't affect him one way or another if he tried to bolt chasing a squirrel or something. I, on the other hand, will admit I was nervous once he handed me the leash to hold him because if he decided to try anything, I wasn't big or strong enough to stop him. My husband noticed my nervousness. He just smiled and said, "Don't worry, he's well trained. He won't take off, and he won't let anything happen to you." It's important to note that Kuma had no formal protection training. He just loved whatever his dad did and knew he was supposed to protect and keep it safe when dad wasn't there to do it himself. Once he was sure I was comfortable, my husband headed inside, leaving Kuma and I near the far right side of the gas station, with a little dirt path near a wooded area. It was very dark, and there was little light being shed so far from the building, but it was a busy little station, and I could see people so I didn't feel isolated or anything. So I start to walk slowly, allowing Kuma to take in his surroundings when I hear a noise coming from behind me. I turn startled to see a man walking. He notices me and slows his gait, looks around, back at me, then smiles eerily. He changes direction suddenly, heading directly towards me. He says it's awful dangerous out here alone. Are you alone? Something in his eyes told me to run. Just as I'm about to bolt and start hustling towards the people and lights of the station, I hear another sound. This one is new to me. As I clenched my hand, preparing to run or die fighting off this creepy guy, I felt something. Polish, Kuba. In that moment, I'd forgotten that I wasn't alone at all. Not by a long shot. The sound I had heard was a warning, a very lethal one. It was the deepest, most menacing growl I have ever heard come out of anything. That beautiful beast stepped out from behind me, where he'd been observing the threat like a giant dragon rising from the shadows. The man's creepy smile slipped right off his face, as did a few shades of color. Kuma placed his large body between mine and the approaching strangers and pressed back against me, urging me towards the jeep. He didn't have to tell me twice. I turned and started to make my way back to the car, still holding that leash for dear life. He walked backward, pressed against me the whole time, watching my back until we made it back to where we had parked. I tried to look for the man, but he either ran back to wherever he'd come from or made it inside, taking a much longer route, well outside Kuma's reach. I told my husband what happened, and honestly, I'm not sure who would have done more damage to that unfortunate man had they located him. Every day for the next 9 years, Kuma was my best friend and guardian. Rest in peace, Kuma. I, a 20-year-old woman, work part-time at a small business in my local mall and usually work alone. I am a sales associate, so I am required to talk to customers and encourage them to buy things. It was the last hour of my shift when a creepy man came in. He was about in his middle 40s and everything about him was odd. His clothes didn't fit, expensive shoes, socially awkward. He originally asked a pretty standard question about a less expensive item that I happily answered. After this though, he continued to ask questions almost as if he wanted to keep my attention to him. He then asked if he could try out our most expensive item in the store, which is a massage chair, and I say yes. We let everyone try it out. At this point, I just thought he was an innocent yet socially awkward guy. He gets in the chair, try it out, and continues to ask unusual questions. We chit-chat a bit, and I tell him the massage chair's features and the price of it. All of a sudden, the questions get more personal. He asked what high school I went to and if I missed it. Me being naive, I said the high school I went to and that I did not miss going. He said some story about a teacher I've never heard of and said he missed high school a lot. He asked if I lived around there, to which I avoided the question but implied that I lived close. He then repeatedly asked me the price of the chair and asked me to calculate the price along with our second most expensive item in the store. I thought he was fully interested and I was convinced he was about to buy it. We made commission on the chair, so I ignored his creepiness because I wanted to make the sale. He kept insisting that he needed to walk out with the chair today and he has a truck that is big enough to hold it. It seemed I had finally answered his questions to his liking because I was able to walk away a bit. He then made a phone call and started describing how I look, my age, where I live approximately, and what store I worked at. He then said to the person on the phone, we got one. I had suspicions that he was creepy, but this confirmed it. I asked him from behind the cashier's counter, you're not talking about me, right? He shook his head no. He then stood up from the chair and said he will not be buying the chair today. I was so scared and alone, no one else around but me. I ran to the back and grabbed all my stuff and pulled out my pocket knife. He then left the store and hung out right outside the only entrance/exit exit. I didn't want to leave, but I couldn't stay inside the mall. I waited for him to go out of sight and then quickly locked the store doors and ran outside to my car. I called my manager and she said I have to close the store properly, turn off lights, count register. So she told me to go into a nearby store in the mall and call a security escort. I did that, was escorted back to the store to close up, and was escorted back to my car with no further incident. I live in a city with one of the highest rates of human trafficking in the country. Was I being targeted by a human trafficker? My mom decided to tell my dad, my brother, and me an incredibly secret one-word code that would only be used to verify that we are who we say we are in case of a dangerous situation, or something like that. It's a pretty unique word. If you can even call it that, it's almost inconceivable to be mentioned in regular conversation. We all thought it was pretty corny, but we all agreed to remember it, and all of us talk about the code in conversation every once in a while. Note that my mom came up with this code several years after we had moved away to a different state, California, from our hometown, Illinois. Fast forward to last week, a tradition of our family is to go back to our hometown for Thanksgiving every year, and my dad's and uncle's birthday is within that week, so we usually celebrate their birthday during this week as well. We decided, since it was my father's 50th birthday, that we'd go to a dive bar with my family and my parents' high school friends. Vibes were great, and it was the first time our whole family had been out together for several years. About an hour in, a late 60s to early 70s man wearing a bar staff shirt came up to me, my brother and my mom, and said this incredibly secret aforementioned family code. The way he said it was so deliberate, it was like he knew how much the code meant to my family. We all looked at each other with very perplexing gazes, like we all wanted to say something to each other, but as soon as we looked at each other, he went over to where he was sitting prior to this incident. My brother went over to talk to him a few minutes later, but I forget what he had said to him. Nothing noteworthy as far as I know. Later that night, he and my dad were outside smoking and gave my dad a rock. It was a dark brown rock with dark orange streaks passing through the rock. I think my dad gave it to my mom, and my mom threw it away. My mom believed that the rock was some sort of bad omen. This really did happen. My brother and I think it's a clever prank that my mom has pulled, but she usually cracks when this happens and we ask her a few times. I wouldn't think she would have joked about this in the first place, but it's the only logical thing that we could possibly come up with. Even the day following, my brother and I asked my mom about this incident again, and she remained very adamant about her having no involvement in this. My dad isn't the prank pulling kind of guy and wasn't even there to see it go down. No negative connotation, but it's just not in his nature to ask a stranger to do something like that, so it eliminates him from doing something like this. We asked him anyway, and to no surprise, he said he had no involvement. It's a creepy interaction we'll likely never forget. We haven't lived there for roughly 20 years, and the only family member living there is my grandmother, who is in her 80s and I don't think even knows how to get the phone number of said bar. As mentioned previously, some of my parents' high school friends still live here. However, it was an on-the-fly decision to go to this dive bar we art frequents, and it's located in a medium-sized city, about 150,000 people. Nobody had posted its whereabouts on socials until later that night or afterwards. This goes back to when I was about 12. We lived in a really bad neighborhood at the time. It was me, my little sister, and our parents. This was the kind of neighborhood you lived in when you had literally no other option. It was a miserable existence. I was often tasked with watching my little sister, who is 3 years younger than me. I also hated this, and I had gone to play with some neighborhood kids and ended up staying out later than we were supposed to. I remember trying to rush my sister because I was afraid I would get in trouble. I don't know why this one specific part sits in my head still and makes me sad to think about, but I remember pulling her arm really hard because she wasn't keeping up. On our way home, we ran into these two older guys from our neighborhood. They were somewhere in the range of late teenagers to early 20s. Literally everybody in our neighborhood hated these two. They were always starting fights, playing their music too loud, and driving way too fast. Just the kind of people that you wouldn't want to hang around. As I'm pulling my little sister, one of them charges at me and picks me up. 12-year-old me wasn't having any of that, so I was fighting him, but eventually he just took me and physically threw me in his backyard. I don't remember how the other bit happened, but the other one grabbed my sister and followed us. This would make sense to me later, but I noticed that their behavior was much more erratic than usual. For instance, one of them would periodically grab me by the head and squeeze it around my ears. This terrified me because I thought they were going to kill us. I was crying, but my sister oddly enough held it together. I also recall they would randomly just scream things at us. Nothing about them was making any sort of sense. This went on for almost an hour. Then a cop car passed and I remember screaming for help. He didn't hear me, family, but the two guys ended up letting us go. We ran home and told our parents. My dad would go and talk to these two, but he didn't do anything about it. I was told many years later by my mom, long after we had actually moved away from there and into a good neighborhood, that on that night in question one of our neighbors had brutally killed his wife and mother. Had we kept running, we would have been in the midst of that. These two guys pretty much abducted us for the sake of protecting us, as weird as that sounds. From what I could piece together, they would scream at us and cover our ears to prevent us from having to hear what was going on. Could have gone about it a lot better, but what's done is done. I'm writing this out because I actually ran into one of those older boys recently. He's actually a cop now and has been on the force for about 10 years. He is very decorated and seems to be making an effort to keeping the streets safe. It was a creepy and scary encounter, but I'm glad that there are people that still want to do some level of good. A little context for this one, just so you know, this ended up being longer than I expected. I, a 32-year-old woman, usually get around town in my own car, but I've used Uber on multiple occasions. This is not Uber bashing, by the way. Most times it is a safe and reliable service, which is why I use it. And I try not to be paranoid despite the stories of women that have gone missing this way. Anyway, this means that every woman I know has thought about what they would do if they found themselves in this situation. Stuff like being on the phone with someone the whole ride, not falling asleep no matter how tired or drunk you are, sharing your location through another app, assessing whether jumping out of a moving car is worth the risk, and even carrying weapons. I carry a pocket knife and I learned to use it. Survivors have told stories of their driver going quiet, turning off the app, and changing routes to streets they don't recognize. They try to pass it off as taking shortcuts. That being said, one day after work I had to take a taxi home, and I scheduled an Uber as usual. The car rolled up, the make and model matched, the plates matched, and the driver looked like the photo. So far so good. I climbed inside the car, greeted the driver, and immediately shared my live location with my hubby, letting him know I was on the way. As an extra precaution, I always check that the locks could be disengaged by hand, and bonus points to cars with windows that could be cranked down manually. The drive started normal. Driver was an older guy, friendly. We struck up a conversation, you know, small talk. We found a lot of traffic and the driver asked if I wanted to take an alternate route. I pointed at an access road that I normally use to skip traffic, and he switched lanes. We were going down the access road, and this is when things started getting sketchy. He said that he made a wrong turn, and we kept driving farther and farther away from the main road, supposedly looking for a way to get back on track. The app was still running as normal, and the GPS was telling him how to get back on the main road, but he kept ignoring it, saying that we were not too far away anyway and that he knew another way to get to my destination faster. So this is when alarms start going off in my head, especially because we kept getting closer to a bad part of town. True, if you cross those neighborhoods you could find another main road on the other side, but most people avoid it for it being the aforementioned bad part of town. Like, police don't even patrol those streets sometimes. As he drives deeper into the neighborhood, he notices I'm tensing up. Truth is, I was debating whether I should reach for my knife or if I was being super paranoid, and the driver was honestly just trying to get to the other main road. So he starts telling me about the neighborhood and that I shouldn't be scared, that it was dangerous, but that good people live there. Honestly, I wasn't so worried about the people living in the neighborhood as I was about this guy taking the scenic route. So I started talking to about how I was aware there was a road that crossed to the other side and that I knew exactly where I was. The conversation at some point turned to his daughter, who was college aged, and I kept making as many parallels as I could between that girl and myself. Hand on my pocket knife by this point, the other hand ready to unbuckle the seatbelt, while I kept an eye on the map to make sure we were getting closer to the other main road, and thankfully we were. I did not begin to relax until I started recognizing where we were. We did eventually make it to my own neighborhood, and I made him stop a block before reaching my house. Didn't want the guy to know where I actually lived, and I skipped out of there as fast as I could. I really hope I was just being paranoid and that I was never actually in any danger, but all I have to say is that was an intense ride. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. Just for context, for my job I'm on call 24/7 and my company is only required to give me a 2-hour heads up before coming into work. I usually leave my apartment 20 to 30 minutes before I have to be at work. I typically get called to work between 9 at night and 4 in the morning though. One Tuesday morning I had to be at work by 2 in the morning. I am ahead of schedule getting ready and I see that my wife, let's call her Jan, places the trash near the door for me to take out. It is about 1 in the morning when I decide to take the trash out. Now usually when I go to work at that time during the week I'm the only one out and about in my apartment complex. When I leave my building and head to the dumpster, which is about 100 feet from my door, I hear a car running. I can be a bit paranoid and always like to know what is going on around me, so as I walk to the dumpster and I try to figure out what car. It was then I realized it is a car that is parked right next to the dumpster and right next to my car. All of their lights were off, so no one could tell outside of the sound that it was that particular car. Because of that, my gut was telling me something isn't right, so I throw the trash away and head back inside to finish getting ready. About 30 minutes later, I go to leave and the car that was running still is and still parked right next to my car. As I go to get into my car, I notice there's someone in the front passenger seat closest to my door. However, due to the dark window tint on the other car, I could not see any details of the person, so I quickly throw my bags in my car and head to work. I usually mess with music before pulling out, but my gut told me forget the music and get out of there as soon as possible. After I get to work, 20 minutes after I left, I see a text from Jan that says our dog woke her up to go to the bathroom. The timestamp is from about 5 minutes after I left. I immediately tell her to take the dog out back, which is a bit more private and not in the designated spot out front, because she would have to walk by the car that was running with someone in it, and the designated spot isn't well lit. Jan responds about 5 minutes later and tells me she forgot her phone. She then tells me that when she took the dog out in the designated area, she too noticed the car running and she too got a weird gut feeling. Remember, Jan had no clue about my feeling until after this happened to her. Jan said that after she took the dog to the designated spot, the car that was running moved from the previous spot, where the dumpster blocked their view of her, to a spot where they could easily see her. She then noticed a man in a dark colored hoodie walking towards her from the general area where the car's new spot is. Now this is a fairly warm time and once again 1 to 2 in the morning on a Tuesday morning, so very odd. She said the man simply walked by her, but he too gave her a strange feeling. She feels that somehow they are connected given the fact that they both occurred so close together. A few weeks later, we found out from our apartment complex that there had been car break-ins recently. We couldn't help but wonder if that car or the man had anything to do with it. This happened to me in the summer of 2019 when I was a 19-year-old woman and working at a dollar store as a summer job between semesters at university. A guy came into the shop around closing, 9 at night, probably in his late 20s to early 30s, and was obviously high. He had the red eyes, slurred speech, everything. Anyways, I said my normal fake hi and smile. Any retail employee knows what I'm talking about, and just let him into the store. He grabbed a cart and started piling stuff into it, only 20 minutes later to come up to my station saying his weed had worn off and he no longer wanted the pile of stuff in the cart. At this point I was super pissed because that meant I had to put it all back. He paid for a few things, thanking me for being so chill about the fact that he was high, then basically started telling me his whole life story about how his wife left him and took his 3 kids with her, that he was broke, all that stuff. He started asking me what my name was, where I lived. Obviously I lied. He said he would be back and walked out. I thought nothing of it. I noticed that he started coming in a lot more often with his backpack, and he always made eye contact with me, coming up to my station to pay for a bottle of water or something. He kept asking me questions about myself, and I was pretty discreet. I suspected that he was stealing. To be honest, I didn't really care, but he always gave me that look as if I was his accomplice or something. Then it started getting super weird. I didn't tell my boss about him. Granted, I probably should have, but I didn't want to accuse someone of stealing because of their financial status or whatever else might be going on. I didn't want to accuse him in case he was innocent and I was just misunderstanding things. I think she knew something was up though because of how uncomfortable I was whenever he came in, asking if someone could cover me on my station or asking for an early break, stuff like that. I wasn't actually at work for this part, but my boss told me about it later. She said he came into the store in tears, admitting that he had been stealing from the store the last couple of weeks. He told her he had made a list of things he stole and was going to pay it all back. This is where I reminded it was a dollar store. It's not like he snagged the Mona Lisa. I was stocking shelves when I saw him next. He came up the aisle and snuck up behind me, startling me. He insisted he wasn't there to steal, then professed his love to me, insisting that I call him. I didn't even have his number, not that I would have if I did. I wasn't at my station when he went up to pay for a handful of chocolate bars, but my boss was, and she told me he pulled out a wad of bills to pay for them. She asked him where he got the money and he quote responded, "I found a pot of gold." She thought he was joking, so she asked him with amusement where he found it and he quote responded, "I found it next to a dead leprechaun." To say she was freaked out was an understatement. And she told me that if he came back to call her immediately. A week later was when I saw him next, annoyed at the sound of a car in the parking lot. I turned, looking out the window behind my station to see a car. It looked like an expensive blue sports car, maybe like a Lamborghini or something, I'm not sure, but it was definitely expensive. It was racing through the parking lot very loudly and stopped right in front of the store. I watched him get out and my eyes widened in shock. He was in an expensive black suit, hair gelled back. He looked like he just came out of a board meeting. So he comes into the store and before Before I could even call my boss over the speaker, he was up at my station, leaning towards me and saying, "So, when are you gonna call me?" in like this flirty/seductive way. I don't remember what I said, probably made up some excuse. I transferred stores to another city for school not long after, so I never saw him again, but I still remember his face that last time when he looked at me like a piece of meat instead of a person. I also question what he meant when he said a dead leprechaun. My friends think he won the lottery, my mother thinks that he got an inheritance from a dead relative, but I'm not sure. I'll try and keep this story as short as I can, but so much of what makes it creepy is in the details and atmosphere surrounding my experience. My mother and myself decided to visit Nevada City on a whim. It's an old-timey Victorian-era mining/logging town built in 1856. Look at pictures on Google if you really want to see a creepy town. It looks haunted without having to try. After eating lunch at a brew pub, we decided to stroll around the massive Pioneer Historical Cemetery on the outskirts of town. It wasn't quite dusk, but the trees are really tall in this area, so daylight is hard to gauge, and it usually feels later than it is. This cemetery was sprawling. I mean, most pioneer cemeteries are, because of the high mortality rate of the time, and lots of child graves. As we progress through the cemetery, it starts like a proper cemetery with large, ornate tombs/mausoleums, marble obelisks, family plots, stuff like that. What's wild about this cemetery is that it stretches on almost forever into the woods. As we follow the cemetery deeper and deeper into the woods, it becomes hard to tell what's a grave or not, and it's getting more wild and overgrown. It eventually devolved into just wilderness, with the occasional sign of homeless camps like abandoned tents and bags of trash. Luckily, the trees were opening up and more daylight was coming through, and we ended up in an open area with a large solitary juniper tree, tall brush, and a few random graves. I sort of tripped over something, and it turned out to be a purse, like a large designer purse, and it looked super old, like it had been there a while. Looking up from the purse about 10 yards ahead, I saw what looked like a pile of women's clothing, but then I noticed to my horror a tangled mass of hair, and I froze. Never know something without actually quote-unquote knowing something. I knew that this was a dead woman's body down to my core. I put a hand out and stopped my mom, who was trailing behind me. "Get your phone, call the police, that's a dead body over there." And she immediately started dialing 911 because, like me, she just knew. Then it gets bananas. As my mom and I are discussing the situation, we had our attention turned away from the corpse. When we looked back at the body, I swear to God, she was sitting up with her back turned to us. She was wearing a bright red trench coat and she had super grimy blonde hair that was more standing up than laying on her shoulders. It's like the grime in her hair allowed it to defy gravity. Slowly, she turned her head over her shoulder like something out of a horror movie and spotted us. She literally jumped to her feet lightning fast and turned to face us. Her front was a mess of torn clothing and she was barely covered. In the weirdest gait I've ever seen, she rapidly advanced on us at a jerking/lurching fashion. Her hands were desperately trying to keep herself covered. My first thought was that she had been assaulted. She kept trying to speak, but it was like she couldn't form words, only make short high-pitched squeaks. As she closed on me, she stopped and pointed down in excitement at the purse I had tripped over. I asked if it was hers, and when I did, her expression changed into a horrible smirk. It still haunts me, and suddenly, she was slowly starting to undress herself and we had to shout to get her to stop. By this point, we had the cops on the way. We said we had found someone in serious distress. Be that as it may, we both knew this was not a safe situation for us, and we quickly backed away, turned, and cooked it out of there. When we followed up with the police out of concern and morbid curiosity, they said whoever we found must have fled, because they didn't find her. I hope to God she's okay and gets the help she needs. So at around 12 in the morning after I had gotten off work, my boyfriend and I are watching television and had just put a blunt out when there's a knock at the door. We both look at each other in confusion when a second round of knocks goes off. He gets up off the couch, looks out the peephole, and recognizes it's a woman that had talked his head off when he was checking these apartments out before moving in. She's, as he describes, in probably her 50s and very annoying. He sees her every morning when he's going to work and she always waits for him to leave first before driving off. He reluctantly opens the door as I take the paraphernalia out of sight. I can hear her voice, but she's speaking incoherently until he apparently deciphers heat and not working, to which he then asks her heat's not working. She says yes and asks him to look at it when our cat walks out the door, so he closed it to pick her up. The lady begins walking upstairs, so he brings the cat back in and follows. He sees the woman standing there as he reaches the top of the steps, and from her doorway she says, "Never mind, it's working me," while all the lights in her apartment were off. Pitch black. She then says you can still come in and take a look at it if you want. He says no and decides not to wait around for anything anything else weird to happen, so he turns around and descends down the steps, returning to our apartment where he sat in silence for 5 minutes trying to piece together what just happened before recalling me with the story I just told you. Fast forward to 1:30 or 2:30 in the morning. My boyfriend is asleep now when I hear steps coming down the stairs and then, you guessed it, knocking. But fate this time, I know it's not on my door, so I look out the eye hole and there she is again, knocking on my neighbor's door, yelling more incoherent words for a solid 5 minutes. Eventually she just walks away with no answer, but not in the direction of the stairs to her apartment. I hear her walk back upstairs maybe an hour later. Strange. Fast forward to now. She's knocking on our door at 3 in the morning, to which of course she got no answer, but as I'm looking out of the peephole I can see her mumbling to herself as she knocks. She walks away like before, the opposite way of the stairs, and I didn't hear her go back upstairs until 10 minutes ago as she stomped her way up there, obviously very mad. Just a very odd experience I wish I didn't have in the middle of the night while stoned. I'm going to guess early dementia or substance abuse. Update as this happened Friday night. My boyfriend went to his car to go to work Monday morning and noticed a nail drive into the side of his tire. I'm not saying it was her who did this out of rage to her unanswered box, but it was very convenient as he didn't drive all weekend, so there's no telling when it happened. He did however call her complex about the knocking and yelling at all hours of the night. Update 2, it's Thursday now at 1:46 in the morning, almost a week later. Remember how I said my boyfriend normally sees her every morning on his way to work? He hasn't seen her once this entire week. Her car has sat in the same spot as well. Also, we haven't seen a single light from her apartment, not when he gets home at 8 at night nor when I get home at 11 at night. I'm going to see if I'm able to call in a wellness check on her in the morning because I have a feeling something isn't right. I'll continue updating if anything comes about. This just happened to me the other day and I need opinions on whether or not I should be worried. I, a 24-year-old woman, took my son to my mom so she could watch him while I went to work, as she's been doing for the past few years. After leaving her house, I went straight to work, about 7 minutes away. As soon as I pulled up at my job, a truck parked next to me. There are many cars around at other shops as we are directly in town, but I am the only one at my job that morning. I'm thinking it's a customer waiting for us to open, which wouldn't be for another half hour. So I get out of my car with my store key in hand, and the man in the truck says, "You work here." I look at him and he doesn't look familiar, maybe in his early 40s. I said, "Yes, I do." We open a tent and, smiling, he said, "You get your tire fixed." I wasn't immediately alarmed, just trying to think of how he knew I had tire troubles and where I knew him from. But I didn't know him at all. I told him, yeah, that I had to replace 3 tires because I kept running over nails. He was not from the tire shop or anywhere I had been recently. He told me he had also run over a nail and had to replace a tire. Since I had to go to the bank before opening the store, I told him I would be right back and went inside. When I come back out, he says, "You don't remember me, do you?" I told him no and asked where I met him. He said that he remembered I had a baby a few years prior, that I used to drive a little gray car around, and that he helped me out when I had car troubles. I asked if it was when I broke down in town a few years ago, and he said, yeah, that was it. Maybe he did, but I do not remember him ever helping me. My family showed up to help me that day and get my car towed. The whole time he is speaking to me, he's grinning, which didn't seem off in that moment. He then says, "Yeah, I've been seeing you pumping air in your tires at the gas station and thought, man, every time I see her in that little red car, she's pumping her tires." And then I thought I knew her from somewhere, but I was kind of scared to say anything cause you know people can be crazy. Okay, reasonable I guess. He sees me at the store a lot. I was having to pump air in my tires once or twice a week for the past several months until I finally got new ones. So I don't know how many times he saw me at the station. I still frequently stop there for gas and snacks. At this point, I'm still thinking he's a customer waiting, so I tell him I gotta go and will be back soon to open. He says, "Alright then, my name's Ron by the way." I wave at him as I go to get in my car, but then he starts backing up his truck and leaves. That is when I realized that he literally just followed me to work to tell me all that. I was taken aback for a second. It took me a few hours to process the whole encounter. I don't even know at what point between my mom's house and my work he saw me and began to follow me, but I do pass that gas station on the way to work. I told my husband on my lunch break. He was concerned and believed something was weird about it, as do my mom and a couple of my close friends. Maybe the guy just thought he was being friendly and thought that was a normal thing to do. He may have just been an odd dude. I personally think it's weird for someone to follow me like that. I know not to trust any and everybody, and that you can never be too careful. Just want to know if I should be watching my back more closely. just had something happen and needed to write it down somewhere. I went to my bank at around 10:45 at night. They have a drive-through ATM, which is behind the bank, away from street view. When you pull up to the ATM, there's basically a curb on the other side, so you can only go forward or backward. So for example, if a car was to pull up behind me and one wait around and pulled up in front of me, I couldn't go anywhere. I'm a 25-year-old dude, 5'11" and built pretty big, so usually I don't have many bad feelings about something. I feel pretty safe in the area I live as well. But as I pull in at the ATM, another car comes behind me, didn't think too much about it, but 10 seconds later, another car pulls up on my right, other side of the curb, and just stays there. Now usually I would just go about my business, but for some reason I had a really bad feeling about how the cars pulled up and how the car to my right just stayed there, doing nothing. There was more than enough space to park randomly in front of the bank. Why stay next to me and wait there? My gut was telling me to get out of there, so I acted casual, as if I was finishing up, took back my debit card as fast as I could without acting weird, and got out of there. To this day, I tell myself sometimes I probably overreacted, but it kind of haunts me to think how easy it would have been for them to trap me there and force me to give them all I had. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. We've all had bad dates, right? This is the only date I've had to date that rang every alarm bell and waved every red flag. I'll preface this by saying I don't go on many dates, but when I do, I make sure I follow safety protocol by only meeting my date in public places, let either family or friends know where I'm going, and park in a populated place close by to wherever we meet. Anyway, this date initially suggested we meet at his house to watch a movie and have a few drinks, and I said no, I don't feel comfortable with that and I only want to meet in public. He seemed alright with this, but then brought it up a few more times, and I said if money is an issue we can meet up another time or forget about it altogether. But my date backtracked and went with my idea of meeting at a cafe I chose. I was familiar with this cafe and equidistant to where we both lived. Anyway, he turns up in a two-door car. This detail is relevant, and goes into the cafe, and I follow behind and introduce myself. After a polite introduction, things begin to get weird. I order a Coke and he says, "Don't you want a drink?" I was going to pop into the bar, which is connected to the cafe, and get one. I say no, I'm not drinking, and he looks at me like, "What do you mean?" as if I'm being unreasonable. I already explained in messages I don't drink as I'm on medication, so having to explain it again pissed me off. He seems disappointed and goes to order a cider from the bar while I get a table. Anyway, we sit down with our drinks and the date immediately goes on about going back to his place again, even though the original plan was to stay here and order food, and I already stated that was not happening. He says something along the lines of having a few drinks and eating at his place, and I said we don't have to eat, we can just have our drinks and leave. He gets defensive and says he has money but prefers it if we go back to his. I make a joke and say, "You're not a killer, are you?" And instead of laughing it off, he stares at me uncannily and says, "You don't think I would hurt you, do you?" I laugh uncomfortably and say of course not, but really I'm relieved this date won't be going any further. Date suddenly says, "Are you going to follow me in your car, because that wouldn't make sense? How about we go in my car, but I've got packages in the front, so you'll have to squeeze in the back and I'll drop you back off to your car after." A reality that made less sense than me following him in my own car and then driving home from this house after. The fact it was completely illogical made it even more creepy in my mind. Every alarm bell was going off at this point. I said, "Look, I don't want to go to yours, and your insistence is giving me the creeps." Date looks shocked, mumbles something about needing the toilet, and excuses himself from the table. A few moments later, I see him through the cafe window getting into his car and driving off. Massive bullet dodged in my opinion. Also, the fact his car didn't have back doors made it even more sinister, because imagine if something happened in the car and I couldn't escape. This story happened 15 years ago, and I still have shivers in my spine when I think about it. I was a student at a small university where everyone knew each other. All the students in my class were very close to each other. There weren't many of us, so solidarity was the normal. During the third year, 15 Chinese students joined our class, 14 girls and only one man. The girls were very nice and we welcomed them with open arms. They integrated very quickly. The man, meanwhile, hardly ever spoke. He was very secretive, dressed quite extravagantly, and was always hyper tense or stressed. My closest friends, and I tried to push him out of his comfort zone a bit. We used to help each other with studies. We thought that was normal. We quickly realized that it was a mistake. When he spoke to us, which was rare, his words were incomprehensible. He was completely delirious. He always told us about his fascination for death, that music made him want to kill people, that he hated women. We tried not to judge him and just work, but he became more and more comfortable with us, and every day he told us more and more horrible things. After a while, it was rumored that he was harassing a lot of girls in our university. He managed to get their phone number and was calling them day and night, or he was following them down the street to their house. It was extremely creepy and scary for everyone. One girl in particular really didn't appreciate him following her and filed a complaint against him. He was questioned by the police as well as by the headmaster of the university and asked to go to the hospital for a psychiatric treatment. We didn't see him for a few months after that, so we thought he was off for treatment. Then one day, suddenly he reappeared in class, but his gaze had become extremely disturbing. He stared at people for tens of minutes as if he was going to jump at their throats. I felt very bad that day. And then, one day, I learned from a friend that he had come to university with a huge butcher's knife. He wanted to kill the girl who reported him to the police, but since she wasn't in college that day, he went to see her mother, who worked as a secretary in our department, and he killed her. Some teachers present in the building tried to stop him and they were seriously injured. Finally, he was able to be subdued and put in a psychiatric hospital for the rest of his life. This story traumatized us all, and even years later we never talk about it between us. It was absolutely horrible. After that, I left university because it had become unbearable. After a long week, I was feeling the need to unwind, so I accepted an invitation from one of my friends to join her and a few others for a night at one of the local bars. We played pool, we danced a bit, and we had a few beers. I'm not much of a drinker, it messes with my metabolism, but I had a few pints of beer. I'm 6'1", and it's something that works in the world of fighting, but it has, in the past, been a severe source of insecurity for me. Over the years, I've learned to just embrace the insecurities, but every now and then it rears its ugly head. Most of the guys and girls that I date are shorter than me. That's totally fine, but when someone that's 6'5" comes my way and shows interest, I'm more likely to be interested. Maybe it's shallow, maybe it's insecurity. I really don't know, but that's not entirely the point of this story. This guy was very cool. He was an athlete, funny, cute, charming, the whole 9 yards. I beat him at a game of pool. We danced, we had a shot, just had a fun time over the course of a few hours. We exchanged numbers and all was good. Come closing time, he asked if he could walk me to my car. That sounded lovely, and I told him as such. We walked to my car and I thanked him for a fun evening. He grabbed me by the waist and pulled me in for a kiss. I wasn't exactly ready for one, so I gave him a side kiss and told him to give me a call for a date. This was apparently not good enough. He wrapped his arms around my waist tighter and pulled me in. I pushed him away and said that I wasn't the kind of person to kiss someone I just met, and I preferred for him to leave me be. This was also not good enough for him apparently, and he pulled me closer. Yeah bro, not going to fly with someone like me. He attempted to nuzzle my neck, but I sent a knee to his groin, then gave him a right hook to the chin. He got noticeably angry, completely opposite of the cool and collected individual he had been all night, and started charging at me. I gave him a few hits to the face and few kicks to his side. The whole time he was attempting to hit me, and a few actually hit me, but eventually he got up and said, and I quote, "You're a psychopath." He skulked away in defeat, which was a source of satisfaction for me. Over the past couple of weeks, I've been feeling some irritation in my right chest. I went to my doctor after some bruising started occurring, and found that one of my saline implants had ruptured. Normally this wouldn't be the world's biggest problem, but I've been told I need to have it either removed or replaced. I filed a police report, but his name isn't in any kind of system, and his phone number is apparently not valid. Ladies, watch yourselves out there. Before I tell the story, it's important to know that my dad is not, by any means, a fighter. He is not an angry man, and if anything, he's a bit meek. So this happened when I, which I'm a 20-year-old woman now, was 6 years old. My dad and I went to the supermarket, and it was one of those grocery stores where there was a hot food section where you could sit and eat, and kids under 10 ate for free. My dad and I were getting food at the buffet, and then we were going to pay at the cash register and go sit down. Now, this whole section of the supermarket was very small. That is, the tables for eating were very close to where you selected your meal. Because my meal was free, I remember asking my dad if I could go sit. He said yes, and he'd be right over again. He was probably going to be, at most, 20 feet away from me if I went to go sit before him. When I sat down, I remember a grown man, about my dad's age at the time, coming to sit directly across from me at the table. The table only sat 2 people. He said, "Do you mind if I eat with you?" And I just remember feeling so scared that I froze and went quiet. I didn't answer even though my 6-year-old impulse was to be polite. He was like my mouth wouldn't open, but the next thing I knew, before I even had time to feel rude for not being able to reply, my dad was right in this guy's face, grabbing him by the shirt collar. I don't remember exactly what he said to the man, but it was the first time, and one of the only times, I've ever seen my dad raging mad. and it was the first time I heard him use a swear word. I couldn't believe that my dad was actually grabbing someone physically. Next thing I know, security came over and my dad had called my mom, who was in the grocery store shopping, and there was a big commotion. Then we left the store. I actually haven't asked my dad about this in such a long time. Probably since I was a teenager, I sort of wanted out and ask what ended up happening. This happened a few weeks ago and it was so bizarre that I still think about it every so often. Anyway, I was babysitting my nieces who were 8 and 10 years old since my sister was going out to meet this other girl at a coffee shop. I offered to babysit my nieces since her house was nice and I didn't have anything else to do that night, so I decided why not. At first we just watched movies and played video games together. Later on into the night, I noticed they didn't eat anything and so I asked them if they were hungry. They both replied no at first. That's when I said I could make a quesadilla for them or anything else they want. They still replied no. When I mentioned pizza, they immediately yelled yes. Of course they would. Well, bad idea that night. When I called the local Pizza Hut, I ordered 2 large pizzas to be delivered. Keep in mind that I went outside to make this phone call. Quite loudly I should say because it was dead silent outside. I only went outside because I noticed a bag on the street and I thought it was mine or somebody else's. It was just trash when I looked closely at it. I'm assuming this was the neighbor's trash bag. 20 minutes go by and I hear a doorbell ring. It was the Pizza Hut delivery girl. I paid her in cash and I took the pizzas to the kitchen where my nieces were eating at. This is when the weird stuff happens. Not even 10 minutes go by and I hear the doorbell ring again. I was skeptical at first and looked out the window. It was hard to see much of anything by this point. I opened the door only to be greeted by an old man with a pizza box in his hand. He says to me, "Hello son, I got your pizza that you ordered." I tried to answer in a way that would divert the situation. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't order any pizza. You must have got the wrong location." That's when I tried to close the door but he pushed his hand hard on the door. "Are you sure?" He replied. I firmly replied back yes and I closed the door. I thought that was the end of that until one of my nieces told me, "Why is there a man just standing outside our house?" I was confused but my heart started to pound when I thought it was the same old man from earlier. I was right. It was the same old man still standing outside the house with the pizza box still in his hand. I was absolutely livid. I opened the door furiously and yelled at him that I would call the cops immediately. He ran off. My sister arrived 2 hours later and I told her of what happened. She looked immediately concerned and then asked who it was. I told her it was an old man who impersonated a pizza delivery worker. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. This took place in 2011. I'm a 29-year-old dude now, but I was 17 at the time living in Illinois. I and my best friend, let's call Simon, had gone out in the evening to celebrate the birthday party of our mutual friend Gabe, and we had taken Simon's dad's rather beat-up Buick Century. The party itself went pretty smoothly. It's what happens after where the creepy encounter begins. Simon and I start our way back at around 10 to 10:30 at night. We decided to take the quiet, windy road back home cause it would get us home quicker. As we went through the road, we noticed somebody walking down the side of the road not too far from the nearest gas station. We found it a bit odd because she was going away from the gas station, not towards it, and we didn't see a parked car anywhere in sight. This mysterious person began coming closer towards our car and we slowed down and got a proper look at who the person was. She was an older woman, probably in her middle to late 30s with blonde hair and fair skin. She looked quite disheveled as well. We wondered if this woman was lost or something, so we stopped our car and she got closer towards us. Before we could ask her if she needed help, she noticed us and stared at us for some time before whispering "Hello boys" to us in a rather creepy, soft and seductive tone as if to try and lure us into something. We didn't know how to respond, but she quickly added, "Want me? Come with me if you do." And she began to start undressing her top in an attempt to flash us, and we knew at that moment she was most likely a hooker. We felt even more creeped out cause first of all we were 18 yet and this much older woman is obviously trying to lure us into something bad or potentially something worse. Of course we said no, to which the woman responded in the same seductive tone with a creepy smile to top things off. "Well, you don't want me, you say, but I can make you two change your mind and then you are going to come with me." I told Simon we needed to get out of here and he agreed. We started the car as quickly as we could, but not before I looked in the rear view mirror, seeing the woman trying to chase after us, running as fast as she could. I was worried the woman might be able to catch us before we got up to speed, but thank God we were able to escape her. Eventually we reached my home, but we were still completely spooked and shaken, and my older sister had noticed that as well and asked us if we were alright. but we didn't reply and simply nodded. I didn't have the guts to tell her what I encountered that day. There are so many things about this encounter that I think about to this very day, and I still discuss this with Simon as well. What was this woman's motive to look on the streets in the middle of the night for random young guys for whatever knows what, and was she acting alone or part of a deeper scheme? What if we gave in to her demands and went with her? Where would she have taken us? Why did she chase after us? What if she caught us after we tried to leave? I don't know, we can't say, but we both believe we definitely avoided something potentially far worse that night. I only hope that she didn't have any victims. I think this might be more dangerous than what I thought it originally was. But I don't know, maybe I'm overreacting, but it all started when the new school year started in August, and it's only gotten worse since then. Going back to the first incident with him, it was the first day of school, and it was my first day of high school, so I was new to the school. My friends and I were walking around trying to find out classes when I realized I forgot to fill my water bottle, so I told them I'd be right back and went to find a bathroom. Of course, then I got lost, so I had to ask someone to help me find the bathroom. I asked the closest person to me, which happened to be him. I ask him if he can show me where the bathroom is. He says yes. I tell him thank you, and we make small talk. He asks if I'm a freshman. I told him yes. He told me he's a junior, and he told me his name. Then he asked mine, which I stupidly told him because he seemed nice enough. So he leads me to the bathroom, and I tell him thanks again, expecting him to walk away, but he didn't. Instead, he sat and waited while I filled up my water bottle. I must have given him a look or something, because he then said he is going to walk me to my first class. I said thank you because I thought the gesture was nice. So he walks me to the class, but before I can go in, he asks me for my number, which I stupidly gave him. He texts me that entire class period. I eventually shut my phone off because the text got annoying. After the class was over, my friends and I started walking to our next class. When we ran into him, he pulled me by my arm fairly aggressively like it left bruises, and starts asking me why I didn't respond to any of his texts and how I'm rude and disrespectful. I told him I shut my phone off because I didn't want to get in trouble. He accepted the answer, but I could tell he was still mad. I didn't see him again until the end of the day. I was walking out of the school and going to untie my bike. Because I had biked to school, my house was walking distance. When I was untying my bike, he asked if I was biking home. I said yes because I live close. He offered me a ride, which I politely declined because I didn't know him that well and I didn't feel comfortable. He said okay and left. As I was biking home though, I noticed a black car that was following me all the way to my house and sat at the end of my driveway watching me put my bike away. I wanted to see who it was, and so I went to look, and guess who came out of the car? Hibbo. I asked what he was doing and he said he wanted to make sure I got home safe. I said that I was fine and that he didn't have to do that. He insisted it was necessary. I said goodbye and went inside. The next few weeks at school, he would constantly follow me, text me through almost all my classes, and whenever I would talk to anyone else, he would get so upset at me. He would follow me home with his car every day to make sure I got home safe or something, I don't know. I was getting annoyed of him following me everywhere and constantly having eyes on me, so I ended up telling him to stop following me and blocking his number. He was very angry. After I did that, the next few days after were bad. Every time he ran into me in the halls, he would yell at me in front of everyone and say how horrible of a person I am. One time when we were next to the bathrooms, he shoved me up against the wall and held me against the wall saying how I better unblock him or else. I didn't know how to respond, but I cried. Thankfully, a teacher overheard the whole thing and made him get off of me. He was suspended, and that solved the issue at school. But later that night, I was at home and it was maybe 10:30 at night. I was watching television when I see someone flashing their headlights directly outside of my window. I look out and it's his car. He doesn't do anything, just sits and keeps flashing his lights. I close my blinds and tell my sister because our mom works overnight, so we usually put ourselves to bed and she's back in the morning. Plus my sister's is always home and she's an adult, so I'm okay. She goes and looks out the window and he's there still. She locks the door and says to just hang out in the living room, and that he probably needed something but it's late and he will have to wait. He came and sat outside my house every night that week. Later they're probably around midnight, so my sister was already asleep. I pretended to be, but I was always woken up by his stupid bright headlights. He never did anything, just sat outside my house. But then he just stopped and I got like a week's break. Until this past week. I was getting ready for bed a few nights ago and I saw his headlights again, but this time only for a few seconds, and then they shut off, and it was only a few minutes before I heard knocking on my window. I lost it and went and got my sister, who called the police, but again before they could even come he was gone. I gave them his name and they said they would look into it. He ended up denying ever being at my house, so it was just his word against mine because we didn't have cameras. They ended up making him sign something saying he won't come to my house anymore and will keep out of contact with me. I'm not sure what it was though. He didn't come back to my house anymore this week, but he has been giving me looks at school, so for the love of God, please leave me alone. I'm still scared he might do something worse. This all started about a month ago, starting quote unquote innocently enough that I just didn't really care too much. I live in a townhouse and my neighbor who I share a wall with has had someone recently move in with him, a man who I assume is his brother. The first instance was me laying in bed reading and I could hear some slight breathing or a general sense that I am being listened to. This escalated through the next few weeks with this man whacking it nearly every night when my window was open. I would look outside quickly to see who it was and I could never get a glimpse of this person. I was so confused how they could scale the 6-foot fence back in my yard that quickly. From that, it escalated to him whacking it at all hours of the day on random days. On the days he did it, he would do it all day. My bedroom window and my living room window and kitchen window downstairs on opposite sides of house. I thought I was losing it. Like, are there more than one person? How does this person run away so fast? But I was just like, whatever. I'm a man too, so I didn't feel particularly threatened. I had a bat in each room just in case. This is when stuff went sideways last night. The whacking, it was on another level, and I kept hearing breathing in my basement, and it sounded like someone was in the walls. I kept running to windows and downstairs looking everywhere. Again, I could never find this person. This whole night I thought I was losing myself. I was extra vigilant, listening in silence in my room. And then I heard it. The man was walking on my roof and peering over where my window was in my bedroom. I freaked out, pushed open my attic, and thank God he was not inside the attic, but opening it allowed me to hear his footsteps on the outside roof crystal clear. Every time someone would be walking on his side and potentially see him, he would run back to other side and hide. I called my brother to come try get a picture of him. This part is embarrassing. I pretending I was whacking it off to lure him to my window close. That was when he would go wild. He took off when bro was down there. He was crunching leaves, I think, I'm not sure. Well, now I know I'm not crazy because I can hear him perfectly clear, and on top of that I can hear him perfectly clear and run back into my neighbor's house when he gets too spooked. Well, this is the really scary part. I have a very small window in the basement in a pretty old house that I had absolutely no idea was even able to be opened. Turns out it can and was unlocked. The man has been in my basement for God knows how many times. For some reason, I don't feel particularly that scared. I have a feeling he is disabled or something and feel bad for him. I've seen his hand opening the back door, seeing me, and then running back inside, and it was really dirty. I think he is scared of me because he ran so fast in that house when he saw me backyard, but then crawled back out so I couldn't see him from fence, and you guessed it, whacked it off really loud. So I said out loud to him, if he doesn't stop going on my roof or entering my house, I'm going to tell his brother and the cops potentially. I'm totally assuming this, but I have a feeling the brother took him in because he had nowhere to go and is disabled in some way, so I'm scared he will kick him out. Now all my windows are locked top and bottom, and at least it's almost winter, so at least I don't mind to keep windows shut. I told the police non-emergency what's up and identify him in case there has been any other instances in neighborhood, and or I have the bat as ribs one day in my house. This happened a few years ago, but I still feel uneasy every time I see a car that looks similar to this one. I am a weed smoker, and usually when I'm alone I love to light a joint and relax. I had just moved into a new apartment, and I didn't want to risk upsetting neighbors or worse violating my lease by smoking inside, so I went out to my car to smoke in the parking lot. It was at around 12. I parked my car a ways down from my apartment so none of my new neighbors could see me. I was worried about making a bad impression. I was at the end of a dead-end street with one street light lit for the area. There are parked cars around me, but it is dead silent outside, so I assumed I was the only one in the area. I smoked my joint, listened to music, and scrolled on my phone until I was ready to head back to my place. I was in this spot for about half an hour. Again, there was no cars coming in or out during this time. There was also no people around either. Once I decided to head back, I backed my car out of the spot and angled it to begin driving down the road. Immediately, a blue Ford Fusion pulls out of the parking spot a few down from me and pulls right in front of me, facing me, and blocking my way. We both sat there for a few minutes and I began to become scared. I was blocked in and this car was not moving. Its headlights were blinding. After what felt like an eternity, the car finally drove forward and moved to the side, very slowly. I drove past it as it sat there still. I tried to glance in the window as I passed to get a look at who the person was, but they were tinted. I drove to my apartment and ran inside as fast as I could. I spent the rest of the night feeling uneasy. I was scared they would come to my door. My boyfriend came over the next day and I told him what had happened, how I had a gut feeling something wasn't right. It wasn't a person playing a prank, but someone genuinely wanted to scare me. A week goes by and I didn't see the car, so I thought it was just a one-time event. My boyfriend and I decided to go grab some food, so we pulled out of my neighborhood and stopped at the stop sign before we entered the main road. As we're sitting at the stop sign, I see the blue Ford Fusion pulling in, passing me. It felt like slow motion. I tried looking into the window again, but couldn't see past the tint. Despite this, I could feel the person inside that car staring at me. I started to panic and pointed to the car and told told my boyfriend that's it. That's the car that blocked me in the parking lot. I pulled out from the stop sign, and as I did, I could see this car in my rear view mirror turning around and begin to follow me. I began making sharp random turns in an attempt to lose them, however they were on my tail. I was shaking and close to tears at that point. Eventually I did lose the car, and that was the last time I saw it. I still wondered, why did they follow me? What did they want from me? Was it a joke? Or did this person have the intentions my gut was telling me they did? It's been 2 years, and every time I see a blue Ford Fusion, my first instinct is to check for tinted windows. So this experience has stuck in my mind, and I remember it like yesterday. When I was probably 10 or 11, year was probably 2000 or 2001, I was at our local park with a friend riding our bikes. And this particular park was super cool because it was practically a skater slash biker's dream. There was stairs and ledges and natural jumps built into the layout of this patio plaza, which then led down to a sandy beach line of our local lake. So normally it's pretty busy, and you get kicked out by random hero adults or lifeguards telling you that you can't have fun here and to go elsewhere. But this was an overcast, kinda cooler middle to lower 50 degrees kind of day, so the park was completely empty besides me and my buddy. So after an hour or two, we're starting to get bored and noticed it was getting late in the day, maybe about 5:30 or 6 in the afternoon, and sunset was about an hour, maybe an hour and a half away tops. I'm talking dark, no more sun, street lights all kind of sunset. About 30 minutes prior to this, I had noticed a van, I think it was either white or possibly off-white like eggshell colored, pull up in the parking lot and park facing us directly, which was probably about 300 to 400 feet away. I couldn't see the driver too well, but I know for a fact he never got out and nobody got in. At first no big deal, but after about 30 to 45 minutes, during which I would occasionally look in his direction every 5 to 10 minutes or so, and every last time he was staring straight dead ahead at us. He wasn't preoccupied with anything or anyone else. My buddy started to notice this too, and while I started to get this weird feeling something wasn't right, I didn't mention it in such a way that would seem like I'm thinking, this guy's going to kidnap us and do weird stuff to us. I simply replied, yes, I noticed him too, that's odd, but left it at that. So it's now about 20 to 30 minutes before dark, and we've gathered our things and decided to leave. Luckily there was a really busy gas station across the street from the park, maybe a fourth to half a mile from the parking lot slash plaza area. But as we start making our way down one of the multiple paved walkie paths that lead to the exit, me and my friend noticed this van had started its engine and was proceeding to back out of the parking spot. So now we're a little on edge, and we rushed to the mini market. We go inside and both were like, what? And thought that was kind of startling, but proceeded to wait in line to buy our candy and momentarily forgot about what just happened. Unfortunately, as we walked out the door of the store, we see the same janky van sitting across the 4-lane roadway at the park's turn and entrance with his blinker on, just sitting there. And mind you, we were in the store a good 5 to 7 minutes. There's no way he couldn't have safely merged into traffic. Luckily for my friend, he lived maybe 5 minutes away from the mini market, just had to ride straight behind the mini market about 10 to 12 blocks, all of which was 2 or 3 heavily lighted residential type roads straight home. And unfortunately for me, my house was probably about 15 minutes away, maybe less, but I had to ride north of the gas station mini market along this kind of rural highway slash higher speed road, like 45 to 50 miles per hour, with no houses directly on it, and a street light every like half a mile if I'm lucky, before turning onto a different 25 miles per hour rural kind of road that was sparsely dotted with houses, before taking a third turn onto my heavily populated normal neighborhood that has eyes and ears, it would certainly see a child getting abducted. My friend pretty much was like, best of luck, I'm out, and took off towards his, while I started my short ride back home as well. So I'm about to turn off the higher speed highway kind of road and look over my left shoulder as I turn right, and what do I see? That same van driving by my road, and after passing me also immediately starting to slow down. It was like slow motion. I can still picture the fear I felt when I saw the brake lights on the van. Mind you, he didn't slam on the brakes or do anything that would draw attention or be considered erratic or reckless, but my first instinct and thought was he was slowing down to turn around and double back. I never, even to this day, had ridden slash pedaled a bike as fast or as hard as I did that evening. Literally every once of my being was put into going faster than I had ever gone, the entire time thinking this van is going to pull up next to me and do whatever. I was pedaling so hard, just staring straight at the ground, focusing on my feet, that I almost ran into a parked car like 2 blocks from my house. It was literally inches away from running head on into the car. I never bothered to look back once I saw those brake lights. I didn't want to know how close or far whoever was driving that van was from me. All I knew is I was scared, and best believe I'm not going to be kidnapped without the perpetrator having to work for it. Anyway, I made it home but never told my parents. Even to this day, I never brought it up, and I don't know why. So this happened a few years ago, and my brain is still fuzzy because honestly I've kind of blocked this out from my memory. My older sister, who was 23 at the time, and myself, when I was 20 at the time, went to Washington DC one year, and I was super excited because I'd never been before. We started the trip with a private tour of the Capitol building where one of her friends worked at the time. I was honestly super stoked. Even though I had already become disenchanted with politics at that age, it was still really cool to be in the building and learning about the history of the country. After that, we went to the Smithsonian and just genuinely had a lot of fun educating each other in the different subject we were always into. I was always more math and science oriented, and she was English and history. At the end of one of the days, we were headed to the metro station to get a train back to our hotel. Now, I'd been on train platforms like this before, having visited my uncle in New York City a couple of times, and since then been stationed in Chicago with their metro system, so I have a pretty good understanding of how trains and stops work. My sister said she needed to go to the bathroom and to wait for her before I got in the train, and I told her all right before making my way to the kiosk to reload my card. While I was at the kiosk, I got this feeling that someone was looking at me, that overwhelming feeling of just being watched, and it was uncomfortable. I turned my head a little, and there, standing in the corner, was what I can only assume to be a homeless man based off his appearance, staring right at me with huge eyes. At first, I thought nothing of it, as we had people like this back home in Florida too, and went back to what I was doing. I pulled out my phone and started playing a game or something while I waited. Before long, my sister came back and we got on our train. We talked for a bit about what time we were getting up the next morning to catch our flight back, since it was later in the day around noon. When she started to open her mouth, I froze. Standing in the back of the train car, staring at both of us, was the same man I'd seen earlier. I'll never forget his outfit: a dirty gray hoodie, matted brown hair, a face that looked like he suffered from heavy substance abuse, dingy skin, ragged blue jeans, and shoes with holes in them. I leaned in, not breaking eye contact, and said, "That guy was staring at me earlier and now he's still watching us on the train." She looked at him and whispered, "If he gets off when we do, we'll make a dead sprint to the hotel." Honestly, I don't know why we didn't call the police, but knowing where our hotel was, on the end of town where things started to get sketchier, I don't think it would have made much difference for response time. The train stopped at our station and we got off. I didn't see the man follow us, so I thought we were fine. It was still about a 5-block walk to the hotel, and in a really sketchy part of town. It's not that we were cheapskates, it's just all we could afford in all honesty. As we walked, we continued our previous conversation, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. I turned around and saw the man hidden behind a brick wall, peeking out. I froze. My sister turned around and saw him too. When he realized he'd been busted, he stood straight up and gave a big, cracked grin and just kept staring. I wanted to challenge him, being 6'3" and 215 pounds at the time, and yell, "What do you want?" But I remembered my previous encounter with someone following me and just froze, barely squeaking out, "What?" It was about this time the man started walking towards us. I wasn't frozen anymore. We both started a dead sprint toward the hotel. As terrifying as the situation was already, what happened next still makes every hair on my body stand straight up. The man screamed absolute nonsense loudly before letting out a cackle, chasing after us. I was lagging behind my sister a little so she could get to safety before me. She was smaller than me, and I knew if I needed to, I could maybe fight this guy. I grabbed my wallet from my pocket and pulled out the room key, since it was one of those hotels where you needed to have a key to access the building. Once we were inside, I realized just how far away the guy was from me. I played football in high school, and I was still pretty fast, and I had to have had about 10 or 15 yards between us, even if I was running slower. We didn't say anything. We just went upstairs to our room and made sure it was locked in every way possible. We left super early and took an Uber to the airport. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.